The Resonance Between Us, Episode 15, The Alchemy of Love, Relational Consciousness and the Future of Human Connection. Hello, and welcome to The Resonance Between Us, a This Place Called Earth series exploring love, language, nervous systems, and the hidden architecture of human connection. This is Episode 15, the final episode of this series, The Alchemy of Love, Relational Consciousness, and the Future of Human Connection. Because this is the final episode, it has to do something slightly different. It cannot simply introduce a new theme as though it stands alone. It has to gather the whole journey. It has to return to the beginning and ask what has changed. It has to look back across every layer we have moved through: attraction, biology, desire, attachment, projection, attention, archetype, chemistry, synchronicity, digital distortion, soulmate, longing, jealousy, rupture, grief, and reconstruction, and ask what love becomes when all of those forces are brought into awareness. Because this series was never only about relationships in the ordinary sense. It was not only about who we choose, who chooses us, why attraction happens, why bonds form, why people stay, why people leave, why the body remembers, why the heart breaks, or why love can feel both sacred and destructive. It has always been about the field beneath the relationship, the hidden architecture, the body before the story, the nervous system before the words, the wound before the ideology, the projection before the fantasy, the chemistry before the conclusion, the digital signal before the human meeting, the grief before the identity is rebuilt, the possibility that love, when approached consciously, is not just something that happens to us, it is something that reveals us. In Episode 1, The Signal Before Words, we began with the earliest movement of attraction, that subtle orientation before language catches up. We explored the possibility that the connection begins before explanation. Before someone becomes a partner, before they become a label, before they become a story, the body may already be noticing, scanning, sensing, leaning, opening, resisting, or recognizing something. In Episode 2, Make Choice, we looked at desire beneath the surface of preference. We asked what attraction may be selecting for, and whether what we call my type may carry biology, memory, status, culture, unconscious pattern, and nervous system recognition inside it. In Episode 3, The Nervous System of Love, we moved into attachment, regulation, safety, and the reality that love does not live only as emotion. It lives as a state. Some people settle the body, some activate it, some feel safe because they help the nervous system soften, others feel intoxicating because they awaken uncertainty, pursuit, and old emotional survival patterns. In Episode 4, The Mirror Effect, we explored projection, reflection, hidden recognition, and the way another person can reveal what remains unconscious within us. Love became a mirror, not only of who the other person is, but of what they awaken inside the self. In Episode 5, Orbiting, we moved into attention fields, presence, interpersonal gravity, and the strange way people can occupy awareness before contact becomes relationship. We explored attraction as a field, a movement, a pull, a kind of emotional gravity that can form before anything is clearly named. In Episode 6, Alpha, Beta, Sigma, we explored archetypes, masculinity, identity construction, and the roles people perform inside the field of attraction. We asked whether dominance is always strength, whether detachment is always sovereignty, whether softness is really weakness, and whether many relational identities are not truth but strategies. In Episode 7, The Red Pill Consciousness, we explored gender narratives, pain, algorithmic polarization, and the way relational wounds can become ideology. We looked at how rejection can harden into doctrine, how cynicism can be mistaken for truth, and how a wounded nervous system can begin calling its armor awakening. In Episode 8, Chemistry, we explored neurobiology, addiction, hormonal bonding, desire, reward, uncertainty, and emotional charge. We asked whether chemistry is always the truth, or whether sometimes the body can become hooked on intensity before the heart has recognized whether the bond is safe. In Episode 9, Entanglement, we entered the language of resonance, synchronicity, conscious connection, and meaning. We asked how to honor mystery without abandoning discernment, and how to hold symbolic experiences without forcing every charged connection into destiny. In Episode 10, The Body Keeps the Bond, we explored somatics, touch, emotional memory, absence, rhythm, and the sensory traces of love. We looked at why the mind may know a bond has changed while the body is still learning how to release what it once held inside. In Episode 11, The Digital Dating Arena, we explored dating apps, parasocial desire, algorithmic attraction, validation loops, digital intimacy, AI companionship, and the way technology reshapes attraction before presence has fully arrived. We asked what happens when a profile is mistaken for a person, a match for a bond, and access for intimacy. In Episode 12, Soulmates and Shadow Attraction, we explored destiny, projection, familiar pain, twin flame narratives, sacred mirrors, and the way the nervous system can mistake an old wound for fate. We asked whether what feels destined is sometimes love, sometimes meaning, and sometimes from familiar pain returning in spiritual language. In Episode 13, Jealousy, Polarity, and Possession, we explored jealousy as relational threat detection. We looked at loyalty, comparison, betrayal, trauma, masculine and feminine polarity, devotion, control, and the danger of turning love into territory when fear enters the field. And in Episode 14, Breakups as Ego Death, we explored heartbreak, attachment withdrawal, grief, identity collapse, digital ghosts, and the death of the relational self. We looked at why a breakup can feel like the collapse of a world, because the person does not only leave, the future image dies, the body loses rhythm, and the self has to be reconstructed without the mirror of the bond. Now, after all of that, Episode 15 asks, what remains? What is love after all the illusions have been seen? What is love after attraction has been questioned, chemistry has been understood, projection has been recognized, digital distortion has been named, jealousy has been translated, and heartbreak has begun to reconstruct the self. This is where we arrive at alchemy. Not alchemy as something mystical in a shallow sense, not as a decorative word for transformation, but alchemy is the slow process by which unconscious material becomes consciousness, the process by which attraction becomes self-knowledge, projection becomes integration, chemistry becomes discernment, jealousy becomes translation, grief becomes reconstruction, and love becomes less of a place to disappear and more of a field in which we become more fully human. The alchemy of love is not the fantasy that love fixes everything, it is the possibility that love reveals everything. It reveals the body, the wound, the desire, the fear, the projection, the longing, the role, the history, the nervous system pattern, the need to be chosen, the fear of being seen, the ache to belong, the places where we perform, the places where we collapse, the places where we control, the places where we give too much, the places where we withhold, the places where we confuse intensity with intimacy, safety with boredom, chaos with passion, possession with devotion, and longing with destiny. And if we can remain conscious inside that revelation, love becomes alchemical. Not because it stops hurting, not because it becomes perfect, not because it removes conflict, uncertainty, grief, or loss, but because it transforms what would otherwise remain unconscious repetition into awareness, responsibility, repair, and freedom. So let's begin. Love after illusion. What is love after illusion? That may be the central question of this final episode. For much of life, love is not only experienced as love. It is mixed with fantasy, biology, conditioning, performance, hope, projection, attachment, cultural scripting, digital validation, spiritual longing, sexual charge, fear, and the unfinished stories of the self. We may call it love, but inside that word there may be many forces moving at once. There may be the body recognizing a familiar nervous system state. There may be the psyche projecting a future onto someone it barely knows. There may be a wound longing to be chosen differently this time. There may be the ego wanting confirmation that it is desirable, worthy, special, irreplaceable, or finally safe. There may be chemistry, reward, and uncertainty creating a bond before trust has been built. There may be loneliness searching for rescue. There may be digital attention impersonating intimacy. There may be soulmate language trying to give meaning to pain. There may be jealousy trying to protect the bond by controlling the person. There may be grief in trying to hold on to the version of the self that existed inside the relationship. So when we ask what love is, we are not asking a simple question. We are asking what is left when we begin separating love from all the things that hide inside it. What remains when attraction is not automatically obeyed? When is chemistry not worshipped as destiny? When is longing not mistaken for truth? When a match is not mistaken for intimacy? When a person is no longer forced to carry every projection? When is jealousy translated instead of performed? When devotion is chosen rather than demanded? When heartbreak is allowed to reconstruct the self instead of becoming the final identity? The purpose of asking this is not to make love cold. It is not to turn a relationship into an analysis. It is not to remove poetry, mystery, passion, sexuality, devotion, tenderness, or the strange beauty of being moved by another person. In fact, it is almost the opposite. The purpose is to protect love from being consumed by unconsciousness, because unconscious love often does not know what it is doing. It repeats old patterns and calls them chemistry. It recreates childhood wounds and calls them fate. It uses the other person as a regulator and calls it devotion. It wants to be possessed and calls it passion. It wants to possess and calls it protection. It performs roles and calls them identity. It searches for validation and calls it a connection. It becomes addicted to the body's activation and calls it aliveness. It feels the terror of abandonment and calls it proof of love. Conscious love asks us to slow down and translate. What am I feeling? What is my body responding to? What am I projecting? What role am I playing? What wound is active? What am I asking this person to become for me? What part of me is seeking safety, status quo, validation, belonging, completion, or certainty? What is real between us, and what am I adding from my own history? These questions do not destroy love. They make it more honest. Because love does not become less sacred when we understand the nervous system. It becomes more responsible. Love does not become less beautiful when we recognize projection. It becomes more truthful. Love does not become less mysterious when we understand chemistry. It becomes less likely to be mistaken for addiction. Love does not become less passionate when we honor boundaries. It becomes safer for passion to exist without causing harm. The alchemy of love begins when we stop asking love to carry what consciousness has not yet faced. If I have not faced my fear of abandonment, I may ask love to become permanent reassurance. If I have not faced my shame, I may feel a desire to prove my worth. If I have not faced my loneliness, I may ask another person to rescue me from myself. If I have not faced my need for control, I may turn commitment into possession. If I have not faced my projections, I may fall in love with what someone represents and become resentful when they turn out to be human. If I have not faced my grief, I may keep repeating the same bond with different faces. So love after illusion is not love without feeling. It is love with more consciousness inside the feeling. It is love where the body is allowed to speak, but not allowed to rule unexamined. It is love where chemistry is honored, but not treated as the whole truth. It is love where attraction is listened to, but also questioned. It is love where longing is respected, but not allowed to turn familiar pain into destiny. It is love where devotion is deep, but freedom remains intact. It is love where the other person matters profoundly, but does not become the sole owner of our worth, future, identity, or healing. This is where relational consciousness begins. Relational consciousness is the capacity to become aware inside of a relationship as it is happening, not years later, not only after the breakup, not only does the wound repeat itself again, but inside the living field. It is noticing when your body contracts, noticing when your voice changes, noticing when you begin performing, noticing when you are no longer listening, but defending, noticing when you are projecting, noticing when you are asking for reassurance, but discussing it as an accusation, noticing when you are calling something love that is actually fear, noticing when your nervous system has confused intensity with intimacy, noticing when you are trying to make another person responsible for a wound they did not create, noticing when the relationship is becoming a stage for an old story. This kind of noticing is not easy. It requires humility. It requires slowing down. It requires the willingness to be wrong about the story the body is telling. It requires the courage to say, something in me is activated, but I do not yet know what it means. It requires the maturity to ask for repair without turning pain into punishment. It requires the ability to hold desire and discernment at the same time. Perhaps this is what makes love so difficult. Love activates the very places that most need consciousness, but activation often makes consciousness harder. When we are afraid, we contract. When we are jealous, we scan. When we are ashamed, we defend. When we are abandoned, we reach. When we are desired, we may become intoxicated. When we are hurt, we may turn pain into a story. When we are in chemistry, we may mistake the body's charge for certainty. When we are grieving, we may cling to the very thing that needs to be released. So conscious love is not the absence of these movements. It is the practice of returning to awareness within them. This is why love can become alchemical. It gives us material, not comfortable material, not always beautiful material, but real material. It shows us where we are not free. It shows us where we still perform for approval. It shows us where our body does not yet know safety. It shows us where our worth is still outsourced. It shows us where we confuse being needed with being loved. It shows us where we cannot tolerate another person's freedom. It shows us where grief has not yet been metabolized. If we are willing to work with that material, love changes us. Not by completing us in the fantasy sense, but by confronting us with the unfinished places inside ourselves. This is the movement from unconscious attachment into conscious participation. Unconscious attachment says, make me feel safe. Conscious participation says, let me understand how safety is built between us and where I must also build it within myself. Unconscious attachment says, prove I am worthy. Conscious participation says, let me meet you from a worth I am learning not to outsource. Unconscious attachment says, never leave me. Conscious participation says, let us build trust honestly while respecting that love must remain chosen. Unconscious attachment says, complete me. Conscious participation says, meet me, mirror me, challenge me, love me, but do not become the place where I disappear. This does not remove the tenderness from love. It deepens it. Because there is a kind of love that is based on fantasy, and there is a kind of love that is based on seeing. Fantasy can be intoxicating, but seeing is more intimate. To be seen as a full human being, not as a projection, not as a rescuer, not as a wound repair, not as a status symbol, not as a sacred object, not as a fantasy parent, not as an emotional servant, but as a living, flawed, becoming person that is much harder and much deeper. And to see another person clearly without reducing them to their wounds, their usefulness, their failures, or their symbolic meaning is one of the great acts of conscious love. Love after illusion is no less romantic. It is more truthful. It says, I want to know you beyond what I projected onto you. I want to feel chemistry without being ruled by it. I want to build safety without demanding ownership. I want to be close without disappearing. I want to be free without becoming unavailable. I want devotion without control. I want mystery without bypassing reality. I want passion that does not require chaos. I want a repair that does not require humiliation. I want love that can survive the ordinary truth of being human. Maybe that is the future of human connection. Not perfect people, not flawless relationships, not the absence of pain, but more consciousness inside the field, more language for what the body is doing, more honesty around projection and fear, more courage to repair, more humility around desire, more discernment inside chemistry, more care around digital distortion, more respect for freedom, more capacity to grieve without becoming trapped, more ability to love someone without making them the author of the self. So the opening movement of this final episode is not a rejection of love's mystery. It is a return to love with clearer eyes. After illusion, love does not disappear. What disappears is the demand that love remain unconscious. What begins is the alchemy, the slow transformation of attraction, projection, chemistry, longing, jealousy, grief, and rupture into something more honest, embodied, and alive. The series map the journey from signal to alchemy. Before we can speak properly about the alchemy of love, we have to understand the journey that brought us here. Because this final episode is not a separate subject placed at the end of a series. It is the point where the whole map turns back on itself and becomes one integrated field. Across the previous 14 episodes, we did not simply move from topic to topic. We moved through layers of relationship, the body, the nervous system, the psyche, the social field, the digital field, the symbolic field, the wound, the mirror, the role, the rupture, and finally the reconstruction of self after love has changed us. The series began with the first signal before words, and now it arrives at the question of what love becomes when the signal is no longer unconscious. In episode 1, The Signal Before Words, the series began before language, before confession, before identity, before the mind had formed a complete story about what was happening. That episode asked us to consider that attraction may begin in the body before it becomes a thought. A person enters the room, a face appears, a voice lands, an energy is felt, and something in us notices. The body orients before the conscious mind explains. This was the first doorway into relational consciousness because it challenged the idea that love begins with choice alone. It suggested that much of connection begins beneath deliberate intention, in the subtle movement of attention, sensation, nervous system scanning, and pre-verbal recognition. In that first signal, we began to see that love is not merely something we decide. It is something we interpret, something we feel, something the body begins translating before the mind has caught up. Episode 2, Make Choice, moved from the signal into the question of selection. What are we actually choosing when we feel desire? The episode explored attraction through biology, memory, preference, culture, status, unconscious pattern, nervous system familiarity. It asked whether what we call my type is always as free as it feels. We may think we are simply drawn to beauty, confidence, softness, strength, humor, mystery, stability, danger, or depth. But beneath that conscious language, desire may be shaped by deeper maps. The people who once made us feel safe, the people who made us feel unsure, the emotional climates we recognize, the cultural scripts we inherited, the bodies and behaviors we were taught to value, and the unresolved patterns the nervous system still tries to complete. This episode did not reduce attraction to mechanics. It made the attraction more complex. It asked us to become honest about the forces that move beneath preference. Because if we do not understand what desire is selecting for, we may keep calling repetition chemistry. Episode 3, The Nervous System of Love, brought the series into attachment and regulation. This was one of the central foundations of the whole map. Love is not only emotional, it is physiological. A relationship is not only a story two people tell, it is a state two bodies create. Some people help the nervous system soften. Some people make the body feel safe enough to breathe. Some people create enough consistency for the self to come out of defense. Others activate old survival patterns. They create pursuit, waiting, vigilance, uncertainty, collapse, fawning, or emotional overfunctioning. The episode asked us to stop measuring love only by intensity and to ask what state the relationship produces. Do I feel more present, more honest, more grounded, more able to be myself? Or do I feel anxious, performing, guarded, obsessed, reduced, and constantly trying to secure the bond? This was where love became regulatory. It moved from romance as feeling into a relationship as a nervous system field. Episode 4, The Mirror Effect, expanded this further by showing that the person we are drawn to may not only be someone we desire, they may be someone who reveals something unconscious within us. Love became a mirror. Attraction became a reflection. The other person began to show not only who they are, but what they awaken: longing, fear, projection, shame, desire, unprocessed memory, hidden potential, old wounds, or disowned parts of the self. This episode was important because it complicated the idea that attraction is always about the other person. Sometimes the pull is partly about what they represent. Sometimes we do not only want them, we want the version of ourselves we feel near them. Sometimes we project depth, safety, rescue, danger, destiny, completion, or healing onto another person before reality has confirmed the bond. The mirror effect became one of the key principles of the series. The other person may be real, but the meaning gathered around them may belong partly to us. Episode 5, Orbiting, moved into the field of attention. It explored how people can occupy awareness before they occupy a relationship. Someone may orbit the mind, the body, the digital field, or the emotional imagination before anything is clearly spoken. This episode made visible the gravity of attraction. The person you notice, the person whose message changes your state, the person whose absence is felt, the person who becomes a center of attention without necessarily becoming a partner. Orbiting showed how attraction can exist as movement, distance, pull, tension, delay, and possibility. It also prepared the ground for later episodes on digital dating, jealousy, and breakups, because once someone occupies the field, even without full commitment, the nervous system can begin organizing around them. Attention itself becomes meaningful. To be seen, not seen, messaged, delayed, watched, liked, ignored, or remembered can begin shaping the bond before the bond has a name. Episode 6, Alpha, Beta, Sigma, then moved into roles, archetypes, and identity construction. It explored how people perform relational identities to feel safe, powerful, desirable, protected, or untouchable. The language of Alpha, Beta, and Sigma was not treated as a fixed truth of masculinity, but as a cultural and psychological script. Some people perform dominance because vulnerability feels dangerous. Some perform detachment because needing others feels humiliating. Some perform pleasingly because approval has become survival. Some perform independently because dependence once led to pain. This episode asked whether the roles people identify with are really expressions of freedom, or whether they are nervous system strategies shaped into identity. It also exposed how gendered and status-based language can become a mask. People may say they are strong, independent, dominant, detached, or unbothered, when underneath those roles may be fear, longing, shame, abandonment, or a deep desire to be met without having to perform. Episode 7, The Red Pill Consciousness, took that role-based field into the cultural and algorithmic world. It explored how relational pain can become ideology. Rejection, humiliation, loneliness, sexual frustration, betrayal, and not feeling chosen can harden into gender narratives. A wounded person may begin to turn their pain into a worldview. They may decide that all women are this, all men are that, love is a game. intimacy is manipulation, vulnerability is weakness, and cynicism is realism. This episode was not about dismissing people's pain. It was about asking what happens when pain is not metabolized and instead becomes doctrine. The algorithm then feeds the wound back to itself, intensifying polarization, resentment, and identity defense. The deeper insight was that pain can be mistaken for truth when it is repeated loudly enough. The episode asked whether what we call awakening might sometimes be armor, and whether some people have not escaped illusion, but built a more defended identity inside it. Episode 8, Chemistry, brought the series back into the body, but now with a deeper understanding of reward, hormones, addiction, and emotional charge. Chemistry was honored as real, but not treated as final evidence. The episode explored how desire, dopamine, oxytocin, uncertainty, sexual charge, novelty, intermittent reinforcement, and emotional intensity can create bonds that feel undeniable. The body may become convinced before discernment has finished. A person may feel like the truth because the chemistry is so strong, but chemistry can arise from many sources: attraction, fear, novelty, familiarity, instability, longing, reward, or the relief after uncertainty. This episode was crucial because it challenged one of the most common romantic assumptions, that intensity proves depth. It asked what the spark is made of. Is it grounded attraction, mutual presence, and embodied aliveness? Or is it nervous system activation, familiar pain, or the addictive rhythm of uncertainty and relief? Episode 9, Entanglement, opened the symbolic and spiritual layer. It explored resonance, synchronicity, conscious connection, meaningful timing, intuitive recognition, and the strange way some bonds seem to exceed ordinary explanation. This episode did not dismiss mystery, but it also did not surrender discernment. It asked how we honor meaningful connections without forcing them into destiny. Some people do arrive in ways that feel significant. Some encounters carry symbolic weight. Some connections change the direction of a life. But meaning is not always the same as mutuality. A connection can be synchronistic and still not be safe. It can be meaningful and still not be meant to continue. It can awaken something profound and still require boundaries. This episode helped hold the tension that runs through the whole series. Love contains mystery, but mystery still needs consciousness. Episode 10, The Body Keeps the Bond, deepened the somatic layer. It explored touch, emotional memory, absence, rhythm, sensory imprint, and the way the body can keep carrying a relationship after the conscious mind knows it has changed. A person may be gone, but the body remembers their touch, voice, smell, timing, warmth, distance, absence, return, and emotional pattern. This episode showed that love lives in the body as rhythm. The mind may say, it is over, but the body may still reach. The mind may say, they were not good for me, but the nervous system may still crave the familiar pattern. This became especially important later in episode 14, because heartbreak is not only the loss of a person, it is the body learning absence. Episode 10 showed us that bonds do not vanish simply because a decision has been made. The body has its own timeline. Episode 11, The Digital Dating Arena, moved the series into modern technological reality. Attraction now happens inside systems designed around access, visibility, validation, comparison, and replacement. Dating apps, social media, parasocial desire, algorithmic matching, AI companionship, and constant digital availability have changed how connections begin. A profile can be mistaken for a person. A match can be mistaken for a connection. A message can be mistaken for intimacy. Access can be mistaken for presence. This episode asked what happens when love is filtered through interfaces before the body has fully met another human being. It explored how digital systems can create opportunity, but also disposability, validation, but also addiction, intimacy, but also disembodiment, choice, but also comparison paralysis. It asked whether infinite access has made us more connected, or whether it has trained the nervous system to keep searching rather than truly meeting. Episode 12, Soulmates and Shadow Attraction, returned to spiritual language, but now with everything we had already learned about projection, attachment, chemistry, and the nervous system. It asked why some connections feel destined, and whether destiny language always means love. The episode explored soulmates, twin flames, karmic bonds, sacred mirrors, familiar pain, and the way a person can become symbolically charged because they touch an old wound. Sometimes what feels like fate is genuinely meaningful. Sometimes it is the nervous system recognizing an emotional climate it has known before. Sometimes the person is not a life partner but a mirror. Sometimes pain feels sacred because the wound is trying to make sense of itself. This episode offered one of the key reframes of the series. Meaningful does not always mean meant to continue. A person can awaken something profound without being the one who can hold it with care, presence, and responsibility. Episode 13, Jealousy, Polaric Possession, then explored what happens when the bond feels threatened. Once someone becomes valuable, desired, projected upon, or symbolically important, fear enters the field. Jealousy was decoded not simply as insecurity or proof of love, but as relational threat detection. It may reveal fear of replacement, betrayal trauma, attachment alarm, comparison, shame, loyalty, territory, or the desire to control uncertainty. The episode also explored masculine and feminine polarity, devotion, possession, and the way fear can distort love into ownership. It asked whether we are protecting the bond or possessing the person, whether we are seeking honesty or demanding control, whether loyalty is freely chosen or extracted through surveillance. The core insight was that jealousy becomes destructive when fear tries to turn another person into territory. Love may need boundaries, but it cannot become ownership without losing its soul. Episode 14, Breakups as Ego Death, brought the whole relational field into rupture. If jealousy is the fear of losing the bond, a breakup is what happens when the loss becomes real. The relationship ends, the body loses rhythm, the future image dies, the ego loses a role, and the self must reconstruct itself without the mirror of the relationship. This episode explored heartbreak as attachment withdrawal, grief, identity disruption, digital ghosts, closure loops, and symbolic death of the relational self. It asked why losing someone can feel like losing yourself. The answer was not simply that we are weak or dependent. It was that relationships become architecture. They structure routine, identity, witness, regulation, desire, and future. When they collapse, the self has to reorganize. This episode prepared us for the final integration because it showed that love not only changes us while it is present, it also changes us through its ending. When we place all of these episodes together, a larger map appears. The series begins with the signal before words and moves slowly towards conscious alchemy. At first, the body notices, then desire selects, then the nervous system regulates or activates, then the projection appears, then attention forms a field, then roles and archetypes emerge, then pain can become ideology, then chemistry bonds the body, then mystery adds meaning, then somatic memory holds the bond, then digital systems distort the field, then soulmate language spiritualizes longing, then jealousy detects a threat, then rupture dissolves the relational self. And finally, in episode 15, all of it becomes material for consciousness. This is the journey from signal to alchemy. Love begins as something that moves through us before we understand it. But if we remain unconscious, it can become repetitive. It can become a projection. It can become an addiction to chemistry. It can become digital validation. It can become an ideology. It can become possession. It can become self-abandonment. It can become grief without integration. But if we bring awareness to it, love becomes something else. It becomes a field of revelation. It teaches us how our body recognizes safety and threat. It shows us what we project. It exposes what we long for. It reveals where old wounds still organize desire. It shows how we perform identity. It makes visible the difference between chemistry and care, mystery and fantasy, devotion and control, heartbreak and reconstruction. This is why the series has not been anti-romance, anti-mystery, or anti-love. It has been an attempt to mature in love. To remove neither the poetry nor the biology, neither the spirituality nor the psychology, but to bring them into one field where love can be seen more fully. Because love is not one thing. It is body, language, state, memory, behavior, imagination, culture, technology, choice, grief, and repair. It is a meeting between two people, but also a meeting between two histories, two nervous systems, two symbolic worlds, two sets of wounds, two patterns of defense, two forms of longing, two bodies carrying memory, two futures trying to find whether they can share a path. The alchemy begins when those hidden layers are no longer left to govern the bond from underneath. This final episode, then, is not asking us to become detached from love. It is asking us to become conscious inside it, to feel the signal but not be ruled by it, to honor desire but question what it is selecting for, to respect chemistry but ask what kind of bond it is forming, to notice projection but reclaim what belongs to us, to allow mystery but hold discernment, to feel jealousy but translate the threat, to grieve endings but reconstruct the self, to love deeply without disappearing into the other person. That is the movement from unconscious attachment into conscious participation. Perhaps that is what love has been asking of us all along. Not simply to find the right person, but to become more awake in the presence of another person. Not simply to be chosen, but to understand what being chosen means to the body. Not simply to feel intensity, but to learn whether intensity is opening us or repeating us. Not simply to survive heartbreak, but to reclaim the parts of ourselves that were placed inside the bond. The journey from signal to alchemy is the journey from being moved by love unconsciously to participating in love consciously. That is where the final integration begins. The linguistic decode: love, alchemy, consciousness, intimacy, freedom, and devotion. Before we move into the deeper scientific, psychological, cultural, spiritual, and future-facing layers of this final episode, we need to slow down the language. Because if this whole series has shown us anything, it is that the words we use around love are not innocent. They do not simply describe what is happening. They shape what we permit, what we pursue, what we excuse, what we romanticize, what we avoid, and what we believe the relationship is asking from us. Throughout this series, we have decoded words like attraction, choice, safety, projection, chemistry, orbiting, soulmate, jealousy, possession, heartbreak, closure, and ego. Each time the same pattern appeared, the surface meaning of the word was never enough. The deeper meaning lived in the body, the nervous system, the wound, the culture, the story, and the relational field. So for the final episode, we need to decode the words that hold the whole series together: love, alchemy, consciousness, intimacy, freedom, and devotion. These are big words, perhaps too big if they are handled carelessly. They can easily become vague, sentimental, spiritualized, or overused. But if we bring them back into the body, into behavior, into relationship, into the nervous system, and into lived responsibility, they become useful again. They become not decorations, but instruments. They help us ask what kind of love we are actually creating. The first word is love. In ordinary language, love can mean many things. Romance, affection, desire, attachment, care, partnership, loyalty, longing, tenderness, commitment, emotional bonds, sexual attraction, family, devotion, need, admiration, or the feeling that another person matters deeply. We use the same word for a partner, a child, a friend, a parent, a song, a place, a memory, an idea, a pet, a meal, and sometimes even the fantasy of a person we barely know. The word is so broad that it can become confusing. We say I love them, but that sentence may contain many different forces. It may mean I feel safe with them. It may mean I desire them. It may mean I'm attached to them. It may mean I need them. It may mean I'm afraid to lose them. It may mean they validate me. It may mean I recognize something in them. It may mean they activate a wound I have not healed. It may mean I feel seen. It may mean I want them to become the person who finally proves I'm worth choosing. It may mean my body has bonded to their presence. It may mean I have built a future around them. It may mean they have become part of my identity. This is why love needs consciousness, because the word can hold both truth and distortion. There may be real care inside it, real tenderness, real commitment, real embodied recognition, but there may also be fear, dependency, projection, rescue fantasy, trauma repetition, possession, or the need for validation. The fact that we call it love does not automatically make it conscious. The deeper frame is this: love is a relational field that includes body, nervous system, language, memory, behavior, responsibility, desire, truth, and presence. Love is not only what is felt, it is what is lived. That last part matters. Love is not only what rises in the chest. It is not only the spark, the ache, the longing, the chemistry, the tenderness, or the emotional intensity. Love becomes real through behavior, through how we speak when we are hurt, through how we repair after rupture, through how we tell the truth when the truth is uncomfortable, through how we protect the dignity of another person without abandoning our own, through how we handle desire, jealousy, absence, disappointment, boredom, fear, and difference, through whether we can remain human when the fantasy fades. Love as feeling may arrive quickly. Love as capacity takes time. This is one of the central lessons of the series. Attraction can begin before words. Chemistry can be immediate. Projection can happen quickly. Digital validation can create instant stimulation. Soulmate language can gather around a person within days. But love as a lived field requires more than activation. It requires consistency, repair, honesty, responsibility, mutuality, freedom, and the willingness to keep seeing the other person after the first symbolic meaning has faded. If love is only a feeling, then it may rise and fall with the state. When I am regulated, I love you. When I am threatened, I attack you. When I feel desired, I soften. When I feel insecure, I possess. When chemistry is high, I call it destiny. When boredom appears, I assume something is wrong. When you disappoint me, I withdraw the humanity I once projected onto you. But love as consciousness asks something deeper. Can I remain awake inside the changing states? Can I know when my nervous system is activated and not turn that activation into harm? Can I recognize when I am projecting and return to the real person? Can I honor desire without demanding that desire erase all boundaries? Can I grieve without turning grief into identity? Can I love without making another person responsible for parts of myself I have not yet reclaimed? This does not mean love should become dry or controlled. It means love becomes more capable, more embodied, more truthful, more able to survive the human condition. The second word is alchemy. Alchemy is often used as a romantic or spiritual word for transformation, turning pain into power, turning darkness into light, turning wounds into wisdom. It is an attractive word because it suggests that suffering can become meaningful, that raw emotional material can be changed. What hurts us does not have to remain only as an injury. But alchemy can also become a bypass if we use it too quickly. Not every wound is instantly wisdom. Not every breakup is immediately a blessing. Not every painful relationship is a spiritual lesson we should endure. Not every betrayal should be reframed as growth before the grief has even been felt. Sometimes pain is simply pain first. It needs to be named, metabolized, understood, and given time before it can become anything else. So when we speak about the alchemy of love, we have to be careful. Alchemy is not the denial of pain. It is not pretending that harm was good. It is not turning every difficult relationship into destiny. It is not spiritual decoration placed over unresolved wounds. It is not saying everything happened for a reason, because sometimes that phrase is used to avoid the full weight of what happened. The deeper frame is this: alchemy is the slow transformation of unconscious material into consciousness. In love, it means turning attraction, projection, chemistry, jealousy, longing, rupture, and grief into self-knowledge, compassion, boundaries, repair, and deeper relational capacity. Alchemy begins when we ask what the relationship reveals. Not only what the other person did, though that may matter. Not only whether the relationship lasted. Not only whether it became the future we hoped for. But what became visible through the bond. What did I learn about my body? What did I call chemistry? What did I call safety? What did I project? What did I tolerate? What did I fear? What did I try to control? What did I repeat? What did I avoid saying? What did I abandon in myself to remain attached? What did I ask another person to become for me? What did heartbreak show me about where my identity had been placed? This is where love becomes alchemical. Not because the relationship is perfect, but because it becomes material for awakening. Attraction teaches us what the body recognizes. Projection teaches us what has been disowned or longed for. Chemistry teaches us what intensity does to discernment. Jealousy teaches us what feels threatened. Heartbreak teaches us where the self was organized around the bond. Digital distortion teaches us what happens when attention replaces presence. Spiritual longing teaches us how easily mystery can become fantasy if discernment is lost. Alchemy is not only turning pain into growth. It is turning unconsciousness into awareness. And that is slower, harder, and more honest. A person can go through a painful relationship and become more defensive. They can become cynical, closed, ideological, controlling, avoidant, or addicted to the same pattern in another form. Pain alone does not transform us. Pain must be metabolized. It must be brought into language, body, reflection, accountability, boundary, grief, repair, and new behavior. Otherwise, pain simply repeats with a different face. This is why the alchemy of love is not automatic. It has to be chosen. It has to be participated in. It asks us to stop using relationships only as places to be validated or rescued, and begin seeing them as mirrors of our becoming. The third word is consciousness. Consciousness is another word that can become vague. It can mean awareness, perception, awakening, thought, presence, spiritual insight, self-knowledge, or the ability to notice what is happening. But in this series, consciousness has never been only intellectual. It has not meant thinking more about love until we lose the ability to feel. It has meant becoming aware of the forces shaping our experience before those forces unconsciously govern our behavior. The deeper frame is this: consciousness in relationship is the capacity to notice what is happening inside the body, language, behavior, projection, fear, desire, and the relational field before acting unconsciously. This matters because relationships activate us. They not only reveal our best selves, they reveal our defended self, frightened self, younger self, desirous self, possessive self, avoidant self, pleasing self, controlling self, ashamed self, and grieving self. It is easy to be conscious in theory. It is harder to remain conscious when someone has not replied. When jealousy rises, when attraction overwhelms, when a partner withdraws, when a wound is touched, when the body believes abandonment is happening, when chemistry becomes intoxicating, when the person we love disappoints us. Relational consciousness is not the absence of activation. It is the capacity to recognize activation without immediately becoming it. This is an important distinction. A conscious person is not someone who never feels fear, jealousy, longing, anger, shame, or grief. That would not be consciousness. That would be emotional denial. A conscious person is someone who can begin to notice the state as it arises. My body is contracting. I am about to accuse. I am turning fear into certainty. I am projecting an old wound. I am seeking reassurance but disguising it as criticism. I am calling this fate because I do not want to grieve. I am trying to control because I feel unsafe. I am confusing intensity with intimacy. That noticing creates space. And in that space, love can become more ethical. Without consciousness, the nervous system acts quickly. It reaches, attacks, withdraws, controls, performs, appeases, seduces, punishes, idealizes, devalues, or collapses. It turns a state into a story. The body feels threatened and the mind creates a narrative to justify the defense. Consciousness interrupts that chain. It does not always stop the feeling, but it can change the next action. That is why consciousness and responsibility are linked. Awareness without responsibility can become self-fascination. A person can understand all their wounds and still harm others if they do not translate insight into behavior. Real consciousness asks, now that I see this, how do I act differently? How do I speak more honestly? How do I repair? How do I set a boundary? How do I stop making my fear into another person's prison? How do I stop abandoning myself in the name of love? This is where consciousness becomes relational, not just personal. It is not only I know myself. It is I can see how my state affects the field between us. My tone changes the room. My silence communicates. My withdrawal shapes the other person's nervous system. My accusation creates a defense. My honesty may create safety. My repair can rebuild trust. My lack of repair can leave the wound open. My language can regulate or dysregulate. My behavior can either make love more conscious or make it more reactive. The fourth word is intimacy. In ordinary language, intimacy often means closeness. It can mean sex, emotional disclosure, vulnerability, affection, romance, or the private world between two people. But intimacy is frequently confused with access. We think we are intimate because we share bodies, share secrets, message constantly, know personal details, or have intense chemistry. But these things can exist without true intimacy. Sex can happen without emotional presence. Disclosure can happen without responsibility. Constant messaging can happen without real understanding. Vulnerability can be performed rather than embodied. A person can reveal trauma but still be unable to meet another person honestly. A relationship can be intense and still not be intimate in the deeper sense. The deeper frame is this: intimacy is the capacity to be seen, and to see another without immediately performing, defending, controlling, consuming, rescuing, or disappearing. This is much harder than it sounds. To be seen is not only to be admired. It is to allow another person to encounter us beyond the image, beyond the role, beyond the attractive surface, beyond the carefully managed self. It means letting them see fear, need, uncertainty, imperfection, contradiction, desire, grief, and the parts of us that do not fit the persona. But intimacy also requires that we do not use vulnerability as a weapon, a performance, or a demand. It is not I showed you my wound, therefore you owe me rescue. It is I am allowing truth into the field. To see another person is equally difficult. It means allowing them to be human, not only symbolic. Not only the soulmate, not only the rescuer, not only the villain, not only the avoidant, not only the alpha, not only the fantasy, not only the body we desire, not only the parent we wanted, not only the person who wounded us. A real human being is more complicated than the role they occupy in our nervous system. Intimacy requires the collapse of some illusions. That is why people often fear it. Fantasy is safer in some ways. Projection lets us love an image. Chemistry lets us feel connected without necessarily being known. Digital access lets us feel close without the risk of embodied reality. But intimacy asks us to stay when the image becomes human. When the other person disappoints us, changes, has limits, has history, has needs, has flaws, and cannot perfectly fulfill the role we unconsciously assign them. This is why intimacy is not only closeness. It is the capacity to remain present with reality. Some people fear intimacy not because they fear love, but because they fear being truly seen. Others fear it because seeing the other clearly means losing the fantasy. Some prefer longing because longing protects the ideal. Some prefer distance because distance allows the projection to remain intact. Some prefer digital intimacy because the screen gives access without full embodiment. Some prefer chemistry because chemistry feels like a connection without the slower work of mutual knowing. Conscious intimacy asks for a different courage. The courage to be real. The courage to see clearly. The courage to repair. The courage to tell the truth. The courage to let the other person be separate. The courage to remain present without controlling the outcome. The fifth word is freedom. Freedom in love is complicated because it can be misunderstood in opposite directions. For some, freedom means independence, autonomy, personal choice, not being restricted, not being controlled, not being possessed, not losing oneself. For others, freedom can become a way of avoiding responsibility. I am free can be used to justify emotional unavailability, betrayal, lack of commitment, avoidance of repair, or refusal to consider the impact of one's actions. So we need to define it carefully. The deeper frame is this: freedom in love is not detachment from care. It is the ability for love to be chosen rather than forced, offered rather than extracted, and held without possession. Freedom does not mean there are no agreements. It does not mean loyalty is meaningless. It does not mean commitment is oppression. It does not mean desire has no consequences. It does not mean we can do whatever we want and call the other person controlling for having feelings. Real freedom includes responsibility because love affects another human being. But freedom also means that love cannot be sacred if it is coerced. If someone stays only because they are threatened, monitored, guilt, restricted, emotionally punished, or made afraid of leaving, that is not devotion. That is captivity. If someone chooses loyalty only because the alternative is punishment, that loyalty has lost its soul. If someone's autonomy has to be removed for the relationship to feel safe, then what is being protected may not be love, but fear. This was central in episode 13. Devotion must be chosen. Loyalty must be alive. Commitment must be mutual. Boundaries matter, but boundaries protect the self. Possession controls the other. Freedom is the condition that makes devotion meaningful. But freedom also has an internal dimension. Can I be free inside love? Can I love without disappearing? Can I be close without losing my own center? Can I desire without abandoning discernment? Can I stay connected to my own body, values, friendships, creativity, and truth, while being deeply bonded to another person? Can I allow someone to matter without making them the author of my identity? This is one of the great tensions of love. We want to merge, but we also need to remain. Too much separation becomes distance. Too much fusion becomes loss of self. Conscious love has to hold both connection and distinction. It has to allow the we without destroying the I. It has to create enough belonging for the body to soften and enough freedom for the soul not to shrink. Freedom in love is not coldness. It is not emotional distance. It is the space where real choosing can happen again and again. The sixth word is devotion. Devotion may be one of the most important words in this final episode because it gathers love, responsibility, freedom, presence, and choice into one lived practice. In ordinary language, devotion means loyalty, commitment, dedication, faithfulness, care, and choosing someone deeply. But devotion can also be distorted. It can become obedience, self-abandonment, martyrdom, possession, dependency, or the idea that love means tolerating harm because the bond is sacred. So again, the word needs to be reclaimed. The deeper frame is this: devotion is conscious love in action. It is not obedience, ownership, or self-abandonment. It is chosen presence, responsibility, truth, and care. Devotion is not just intensity. It is not the same as obsession. It is not the same as never leaving. It is not the same as sacrificing the self until there is nothing left. Devotion is the ongoing decision to honor what is real, what is sacred, and what is alive in the relationship. It includes tenderness, but also truth. It includes loyalty, but also freedom. It includes care for the other, but also care for the self. It includes staying when staying is conscious, but it may also include leaving when the relationship can no longer hold dignity, safety, or truth. This is important. Devotion does not always mean remaining. Sometimes devotion to love means refusing to keep participating in what is destroying love. Sometimes devotion to truth means ending the fantasy. Sometimes devotion to the self means leaving a bond that requires self-erasure. Sometimes devotion to the other person means not enabling the pattern anymore. This is why devotion cannot be reduced to endurance. Endurance without consciousness can become self-betrayal. Devotion with consciousness asks, what does love require here? Does it require repair, a boundary, honesty, patience, accountability, space, grief, release, a new agreement, the courage to stay, the courage to leave? Devotion is a living intelligence, not a fixed rule. At its highest, devotion is love that has grown beyond performance. It is not trying to prove itself constantly. It is not trying to win status. It is not demanding possession. It is not seeking applause. It is a steady orientation towards the good of the bond, the dignity of each person, and the truth of what is happening. It says, I will not use love as a hiding place. I will not use mystery to avoid reality. I will not use loyalty to control you. I will not use freedom to abandon responsibility. I will not use my wound to justify harming you. I will not use your love to avoid meeting myself. That is a very different kind of love. When we bring these 6 words together, love, alchemy, consciousness, intimacy, freedom, and devotion, the final language of the series begins to form. Love is the field. Alchemy is the transformation. Consciousness is the awareness inside the field. Intimacy is the courage to be seen and to see. Freedom is the condition that makes choosing real. Devotion is love lived through responsibility, presence, and care. The old language of love often asks, do they complete me? The more conscious language asks, can we meet without disappearing? The old language asks, is this chemistry? The deeper language asks, what is this chemistry made of? The old language asks, are they my soulmate? The deeper language asks, what does this connection reveal, and is it also mutual, grounded, and real? The old language asks, how do I keep them? The deeper language asks, how do I honor love without turning it into possession? The old language asks, how do I get over them? The deeper language asks, what part of me was organized around this bond, and how do I bring that part home? This is the linguistic shift of the final episode. To move love away from fantasy and into embodied responsibility. To move alchemy away from spiritual decoration and into genuine transformation. To move consciousness away from overthinking and into state awareness, behavior, and repair. To move intimacy away from access and into truthful presence. To move freedom away from avoidance and into chosen love. To move devotion away from self-abandonment and into conscious care. Perhaps this is what relational consciousness requires from us now, a more precise language for love. A language that can hold body and soul, science and mystery, wound and responsibility, desire and discernment, freedom and commitment. A language that does not flatten love into biology, but does not let romance excuse unconscious harm. A language that can say love is sacred, and because it is sacred, it must become more honest. Because love without consciousness can become repetition. Alchemy without grief can become bypass. Consciousness without responsibility can become self-analysis. Intimacy without truth can become performance. Freedom without care can become avoidance. Devotion without selfhood can become disappearance. But when these words are integrated, love becomes something more mature, not less beautiful, not less passionate, not less mysterious, more capable, more grounded, more human. A field where 2 people do not merely seek to be completed, rescued, possessed, validated, or healed by each other, but where they become more aware in the presence of one another. Where attraction becomes inquiry, chemistry becomes information, projection becomes integration, jealousy becomes translation, heartbreak becomes reconstruction, and devotion becomes the practice of meeting love with enough truth that it can remain alive. That is the language of love after illusion. It is the language we need before we can speak about the future of connection. The scientific and psychological layer, the integrated relational nervous system. If this final episode is about the alchemy of love, then we have to bring the body back to the center of the conversation. Because love is not only an idea, not only a feeling, not only a spiritual experience, not only a social arrangement, and not only a story we tell about another person. Love is also a nervous system event. It is a field of state exchange. It is the meeting of 2 carrying histories, adaptations, sensitivities, memories, defenses, attachment maps, and learned expectations about safety, closeness, distance, rupture, and repair. This has been one of the central threads running through the whole series. From the signal before words through mate choice, chemistry, somatic bonding, jealousy, heartbreak, and reconstruction, we have kept returning to the same underlying idea: the body is never absent from love. Even when we think we are making rational decisions, even when we believe we are following pure feeling, even when we spiritualize the bond, even when we explain it through culture, identity, or destiny, the nervous system is still participating. It is scanning, predicting, protecting, reaching, withdrawing, softening, bracing, attaching, remembering, and preparing. This does not reduce love, it deepens it. Because if love lives in the nervous system, then conscious love requires more than good intentions. It requires awareness of the state. It requires attention to tone, timing, breath, pacing, repair, consistency, withdrawal, touch, rupture, and the 1,000 subtle signals that pass between people before conscious explanation has finished. A relationship is not only what 2 people say to each other, it is what their bodies begin to expect from each other. That expectation is where love becomes powerful. When someone consistently responds with warmth, honesty, steadiness, and repair, the nervous system begins learning that closeness can be safe. When someone repeatedly withdraws, criticizes, deceives, shames, threatens, or becomes unpredictable, the nervous system begins learning that closeness is danger. The mind may argue with this. The person may say the right words. They may apologize. They may promise. They may explain. But the body keeps score through patterns. It asks, what happens repeatedly? What is the rhythm? What state do I enter around this person? Do I become more present or more defended? More truthful or more performative? More embodied or more anxious? More alive or more fragmented? This brings us to love as co-regulation. Co-regulation is the process by which 2 nervous systems affect each other's state. It happens through facial expression, voice, eye contact, posture, touch, pacing, timing, emotional availability, silence, repair, and consistency. A calm person can help another body settle. A harsh tone can activate defense. A gentle hand can soften panic. A delayed reply can awaken abandonment. A warm gaze can create safety. A sudden withdrawal can pull the body into threat. A repair after conflict can teach the nervous system that rupture does not have to mean abandonment. This is why relationships shape us so deeply. We are not isolated minds having feelings toward each other. We are embodied systems responding to one another. The person we love can become part of how our body regulates itself. Their presence can bring down our guard. Their absence can make the body search. Their approval can soothe shame. Their anger can trigger a collapse. Their tone can become more powerful than their words. Their inconsistency can create vigilance. Their steadiness can teach the body a new form of safety. This is also why love can feel like home or danger before we can explain why. The body is reading the field. It is noticing microsignals, timing, rhythm, emotional congruence, whether words and behavior match, whether the person's face softens or hardens, whether silence feels peaceful or punitive, whether touch feels warm or possessive, and whether closeness feels voluntary or demanded. Much of this happens beneath conscious thought. The body forms an impression of safety before the mind has written its analysis. This is where neuroception becomes essential. Neuroception is the body's process of scanning for safety, danger, or life threat outside conscious awareness. In relational life, this means that we are constantly sensing whether another person feels safe to approach, safe to open to, safe to desire, safe to trust, or safe to depend on. The body does not wait for perfect evidence. It reads tone, eyes, breathing, facial tension, speed of response, emotional presence, and subtle changes in the relational atmosphere. This is why words alone are never enough. Someone can say, "I love you," while the body feels their contempt. Someone can say, "I am fine," while their tone communicates punishment. Someone can say, "You can trust me," while their inconsistency teaches the opposite. Someone can say, "I am here," while their nervous system is absent. In conscious love, language matters, but language has to be embodied. A sentence that is not supported by tone, timing, presence, and behavior will not settle the nervous system for long. This connects directly to the wider work around language and state. The body does not process language as detached information only. It processes language through tone, implication, timing, relational context, and perceived safety. A phrase can regulate or dysregulate depending on how it is spoken. "We need to talk" can open a conversation or trigger panic. "I am here" can soothe or feel hollow. "I love you" can be grounding or manipulative. "Calm down" can sound supportive in one context and dismissive in another. The nervous system does not only hear the words, it hears the state behind the words. This is why repair is so central to conscious love. Every relationship will rupture. Every bond will include misunderstanding, disappointment, fear, frustration, distance, misattunement, or conflict. The fantasy of conscious love is sometimes imagined as a relationship without rupture, but that is not realistic. Two people with histories, bodies, wounds, needs, limits, and different nervous system patterns will not always meet perfectly. The question is not whether rupture happens. The question is whether rupture can be repaired. Repair is the real test of love because repair teaches the body what happens after difficulty. Does conflict lead to abandonment, punishment, silence, humiliation, escalation, or withdrawal? Or does conflict eventually lead to honesty, accountability, listening, clarification, apology, understanding, boundary, and reconnection? The nervous system learns from that pattern. If rupture is never repaired, the body remains on guard. It may forgive cognitively, but it does not settle somatically. If rupture is repaired consistently, the body learns that difficulty does not mean the bond is over. It learns that truth can be survived. It learns that conflict does not have to become destruction. This is a crucial distinction. Many people measure love by the intensity of the good moments, the chemistry, the passion, the laughter, the sexual charge, the emotional highs, the sense of destiny, but a relationship is often revealed more clearly by what happens when things go wrong. Can both people remain human? Can either person say "I hurt you" without collapsing into shame or turning defensive? Can the wounded person express pain without turning it into punishment? Can both people slow down enough to understand the state beneath the reaction? Can the relationship metabolize rupture, or does every conflict become another layer of threat? A conscious relationship is not one without activation. It is one where activation can be recognized, translated, and repaired without destroying the bond. That sentence sits at the center of this scientific and psychological layer. Because activation is inevitable, attraction activates, desire activates, fear activates, jealousy activates, ambiguity activates, distance activates, intimacy activates, being seen activates, being misunderstood activates. The question is whether activation becomes behavior too quickly. Does the person feel fear and immediately accuse? Feel shame and immediately withdraw? Feel desire and immediately abandon discernment? Feel jealousy and immediately surveil? Feel hurt and immediately punish? Feel longing and immediately spiritualize the bond? Relational consciousness creates a pause between state and action. In that pause, the body is allowed to speak but not allowed to become the dictator. The person can say, "Something in me is activated," rather than "You are the enemy." They can say, "I feel threatened," rather than "You belong to me." They can say, "I am scared you are pulling away," rather than "You never cared." They can say, "My old wound is awake," rather than forcing the other person to carry the full weight of the past. This is not easy because attachment patterns are predictive maps. They tell us what to expect from closeness before we have assessed the present clearly. Someone with an anxious attachment pattern may interpret distance as danger. Their body may move quickly into pursuit, reassurance seeking, over-explaining, monitoring, or emotional urgency. Someone with an avoidant pattern may interpret closeness as pressure. Their body may move into withdrawal, intellectualization, dismissal, emotional distance, or a need to regain autonomy. Someone with a disorganized pattern may both crave and fear connection, creating push-pull dynamics where closeness feels necessary and unsafe at the same time. These patterns are not character flaws. They are adaptations. They are ways the nervous system learned to survive earlier relational environments. If love were inconsistent, the body may chase. If closeness were intrusive, the body may withdraw. If care were conditional, the body may perform. If conflict were dangerous, the body may appease or shut down. If being seen led to shame, the body may hide. If abandonment was sudden, The body may scan for signs that it is happening again. The problem is that old maps can become self-fulfilling in present relationships. The anxious partner senses distance, pursues harder, and the avoidant partner feels pressure and withdraws further. The avoidant partner withdraws to feel safe, and the anxious partner feels abandoned, intensifying protest. The more one person chases, the more the other retreats. The more one retreats, the more the other panics. Each person believes they are reacting to the other, but both may be acting from old predictions about love. This is why conscious love requires pattern awareness. Not blame, pattern awareness. The question becomes, what happens between us when one person feels unsafe? What sequence repeats? Who pursues? Who withdraws? Who collapses? Who attacks? Who explains? Who shuts down? Who tries to fix? Who becomes silent? Who becomes controlling? Who becomes helpless? Who becomes superior? What are we co-creating when we are both activated? This is where the relationship becomes a system. Not one villain and one innocent, not always one perpetrator and one victim. Although real harm and abuse must be named clearly where they exist, but in many ordinary relational dynamics, two nervous systems are interacting in patterned ways. One person's defense triggers the other person's defense. One person's fear becomes the other person's threat. The field becomes self-reinforcing. The alchemy begins when the pattern becomes visible. Instead of saying, you always do this, the more conscious question is, what is happening between us that keeps producing this? Instead of only asking, why are you like this? We also ask, what state do I enter, and what does that state invite from you? Again, this is not about taking responsibility for another person's harmful behavior. It is about seeing the relational field clearly enough to stop repeating unconscious cycles. Chemistry complicates this field because chemistry can make a pattern feel meaningful, even when it is not safe. As we explored in episode 8, chemistry is real, but it can be made of many things. Attraction, novelty, reward, sexual compatibility, emotional recognition, uncertainty, relief, danger, familiarity, projection, or the body's craving for a known emotional climate. From a psychological perspective, chemistry can become confusing because it gives the body a sense of certainty. The body says, this feels alive. The mind says, this must be love. But aliveness can come from safety or activation. It can come from grounded desire or dysregulated intensity. This is why conscious love does not reject chemistry, but it asks better questions of it. Does this chemistry make me more present or more obsessive? Does it deepen mutuality or increase performance? Does it exist alongside honesty, care, and repair? Or does it depend on uncertainty, distance, and emotional highs? Can this chemistry survive ordinary reality, or does it only live in fantasy, conflict, longing, and return? Does the body feel alive because it is safe enough to open, or because it is activated enough to chase? The same applies to attraction itself. Attraction gives information but not complete instructions. It may point towards desire, compatibility, curiosity, recognition, biology, or shared energy. It may also point towards unresolved patterns. Conscious love listens to attraction without immediately surrendering to it. This does not mean overanalyzing every feeling until desire becomes lifeless. It means allowing desire to become part of discernment rather than the replacement for discernment. This is where behavioral evidence matters. One of the most grounding questions in love is, what is the repeated behavior? Not what did they say once. Not what did the chemistry feel like. Not what did the early intensity promise. Not what story did I build around them. What is the pattern? Do they show up? Do they repair? Are they honest? Do their words and actions align? Does the relationship make room for both people's dignity? Is care consistent? Are boundaries respected? Is freedom honored? Is conflict metabolized? Does the bond become more truthful over time? The nervous system learns from patterns. So should consciousness. A relationship can have beautiful language but harmful patterns. It can have spiritual language but little accountability. It can have intense chemistry but poor repair. It can have declarations of love but repeated disrespect. It can have emotional vulnerability but no behavioral change. The body may want to believe the best moment, but the relationship is the pattern, not the exception. At the same time, conscious love also recognizes that growth is possible. Patterns can change if both people are willing to see them, take responsibility, regulate their nervous systems, communicate honestly, repair ruptures, and practice new behaviors repeatedly. The body can learn a new map. Someone who learned to chase can learn to pause. Someone who learned to withdraw can learn to stay present. Someone who learned to appease can learn to speak. Someone who has learned to control can learn to tolerate uncertainty. Someone who learned to perform can learn to be seen. This is why love is a learned capacity. We often speak as though love is something we either find or do not find. We find the right person, the right chemistry, the right connection, the right match, the right destiny. And yes, compatibility matters. Not every relationship can become healthy through effort alone. Some people are not aligned. Some dynamics are harmful. Some wounds are too active. Some behaviors are unacceptable. Some endings are necessary. But even when a relationship is compatible, love still has to be learned. The capacity to love well is developed through practice, reflection, humility, repair, and nervous system maturation. A person may genuinely love someone and still not know how to love them well. They may care deeply but become defensive when confronted. They may desire closeness but withdraw when vulnerable. They may want loyalty but become possessive. They may crave intimacy but perform rather than reveal themselves. They may fear abandonment and turn fear into control. They may feel remorse but not yet know how to repair. Feeling love is not the same as having relational capacity. This distinction can be painful, but it is necessary. Someone can love us and still not be safe for us. Someone can feel deeply and still lack accountability. Someone can be sincere and still be dysregulated. Someone can want a connection and still cause harm. Conscious love does not only ask, do we love each other? It asks, do we have the capacity, willingness, and humility to create a field where love can be lived without destroying either person? This brings us to emotional regulation. A conscious relationship requires both co-regulation and self-regulation. Co-regulation is natural and necessary. We are meant to affect each other, but if one person becomes the only regulator for the other, the relationship becomes fragile. If I can only feel safe when you reassure me constantly, my safety is dependent on your continuous emotional labor. If I can only feel free by withdrawing from you, my autonomy depends on your distance. If I can only feel worthy when you desire me, my self-worth becomes hostage to your state. If I can only feel calm by controlling your behavior, my regulation becomes your prison. Self-regulation does not mean isolation. It means developing an inner capacity to bring our activated states into relationship without making the other person solely responsible for them. It means being able to pause, breathe, feel, name, reflect, and return. It means knowing when to ask for support and when to take responsibility for our own state. It means recognizing that the other person may help us regulate, but they cannot become the only place we exist. This is one reason boundaries matter psychologically. Boundaries are not walls against intimacy. They are structures that allow intimacy to remain safe. A boundary says, this is where I can meet you without abandoning myself. It says, this behavior does not work for me. It says, this is what I need to stay honest. It says, I care about the bond, and I also care about the integrity of the self within the bond. Without boundaries, love can become fusion. One person's emotions become the law of the relationship. One person's fear becomes the other person's restriction. One person's needs erase the others. One person's wounds become the organizing principle. Boundaries allow two people to remain two people. And without that distinction, intimacy often becomes enmeshment. Enmeshment can feel like closeness, but it is not the same as intimacy. Enmeshment says, I cannot be okay unless you are exactly where I need you to be. Intimacy says, I want closeness and I can still recognize you as separate. Enmeshment says, your state defines my state. Intimacy says, your state affects me and I can remain in a relationship with myself. Enmeshment says, if you need space, I am abandoned. Intimacy says, your space may activate me, but I can learn to understand it without losing myself. This matters especially in long-term love. The early stages of attraction often involve merging, constant attention, desire, curiosity, sexual charge, idealization, shared time, and emotional intensity. But mature love requires differentiation. Two people must remain connected without collapsing into each other. They must be able to say yes and no. They must be able to disagree without annihilating the bond. They must be able to have separate rhythms, friendships, inner lives, and needs. They must be able to meet, separate, and return. The capacity to separate and return is one of the signs of a healthier nervous system bond. In insecure patterns, separation can feel like abandonment, and return can feel uncertain. In avoidant patterns, closeness can feel like engulfment, and distance can feel like relief. In more secure relating, separation does not automatically destroy connection, and closeness does not automatically destroy autonomy. The bond remains alive even when distance exists. The body learns we can be separate and still connected. This is part of the future of relational consciousness, learning to build bonds that can hold both closeness and freedom. Another key element is emotional memory. Every relationship is shaped by the accumulation of moments. Small moments matter, not because every moment must be perfect, but because the nervous system is building a memory of the relationship. Does this person turn towards me when I am vulnerable? Do they mock me? Do they disappear? Do they repair? Do they listen? Do they become cruel when hurt? Do they respect my no? Do they use my vulnerability later as ammunition? Do they celebrate my life? Do they compete with it? Do they make it safe to be honest? Do they punish honesty? Over time, these moments become the emotional climate of the bond. A relationship is not made only of major events. It is made of repeated micro-experiences that teach the body what to expect. This is why trust can be built or eroded slowly. 1,000 small dismissals can damage trust. 1,000 small acts of consistency can strengthen it. The body remembers both. Repair again becomes crucial here because repair can update emotional memory. If someone hurts us and then genuinely acknowledges it, listens, takes responsibility, and changes behavior, the nervous system can store a new memory. Rupture can lead to reconnection. But if someone hurts us and denies it, blames us, minimizes it, or repeats it, the nervous system stores another memory. Pain is not safe here. Over time, the relationship becomes organized around those memories. This is why apologies must become embodied. I am sorry is meaningful only if it is connected to understanding, accountability, and a changed pattern. Otherwise, an apology becomes another form of language without nervous system evidence. The body begins to distrust the words because the pattern has not shifted. Conscious love asks apology to become repair, and repair to become new behavior. The integrated relational nervous system is therefore not only about individual regulation. It is about the field that two people create together. A conscious relationship asks, what state do we repeatedly create in each other? Do we become more awake or more defensive? More honest or more strategic? More embodied or more dissociated? More compassionate or more reactive? More free or more controlled? More alive or more diminished? These questions matter because love can either expand or contract the self. Some relationships make people smaller. They reduce spontaneity, confidence, honesty, creativity, sexuality, social connection, and self-trust. Other relationships make people more whole, not because they complete the person, but because they create enough safety and challenge for the person to emerge more truthfully. Conscious love is not the love that never activates us. It is the love that helps us become more integrated through the activation. Integration is the key word here. In psychological terms, integration means that parts of the self that were split off, defended, denied, or unconscious, become included in awareness. Love can support integration when it helps us see our fear without becoming ruled by it, feel our longing without surrendering to fantasy, recognize our projections without shaming ourselves, admit our needs without collapsing, set boundaries without closing the heart, and grieve without becoming imprisoned by loss. This is where the alchemy of love becomes psychological as much as spiritual. The relationship becomes a place where raw material is brought into awareness. But that only happens if both people are willing to stop hiding behind their automatic defenses. If one person insists that their fear is always true, their anger is always justified, their withdrawal is always necessary, their jealousy is always love, or their desire is always destiny, then the material remains unconscious. It acts itself out instead of becoming integrated. Conscious love asks for humility. The humility to say, my body is telling me something, but I need to understand what. The humility to say, I may be projecting. The humility to say, my past is active. The humility to say, I hurt you. The humility to say, I am scared. The humility to say, I do not know how to do this yet, but I want to learn. Without humility, love becomes a battlefield of defended nervous systems. This also means conscious love is not purely soft. It is not endless patience with harmful patterns. It is not spiritualized tolerance. It is not abandoning boundaries in the name of compassion. Sometimes the most conscious act is to name reality clearly. Sometimes it is to say, this pattern is not changing. Sometimes it is to say, I love you, but this relationship is damaging me. Sometimes it is time to leave. The integrated nervous system not only softens, it also protects. It knows when to open and when to close. It knows that love and self-preservation are not enemies. Healthy love requires both compassion and discernment. Compassion sees the wound behind the behavior. Discernment recognizes whether the behavior is still acceptable. Compassion understands why someone withdraws, attacks, clings, controls, or avoids. Discernment asks whether they are willing to take responsibility. Compassion says this pattern has roots. Discernment says roots do not erase impact. This balance is essential. Without compassion, love becomes judgment. Without discernment, love becomes self-abandonment. At the nervous system level, the future of human connection may depend on this balance. We are living in a world that often dysregulates people before they even enter a relationship. Digital overload, comparison, isolation, economic pressure, fragmented community, sexualized media, algorithmic polarization, chronic stress, and reduced embodied belonging. People come into love already carrying activation. They may seek a relationship to soothe what the culture has inflamed. But if they do not understand their state, they may make the partner responsible for regulating wounds produced by a much larger field. This is why relational literacy matters. People need language to state. For attachment, for rupture, for repair, for projection, for boundaries, for nervous system activation, for grief, for the difference between chemistry and safety, intimacy and access, freedom and avoidance, devotion and possession. Without that language, people often default to blame, shame, ideology, control, performance, or withdrawal. The integrated relational nervous system is not a perfect system. It is a learning system. It is the capacity to notice, name, regulate, communicate, repair, and grow. It is the ability to ask, not only do I love this person, but what does love become between us? It is the ability to ask, what state do we create? What patterns do we repeat? What do we repair? What does my body know? What does my body fear? What is my history adding to the present? What behavior is actually happening? What does this bond teach my nervous system about love? This is where love becomes less about finding the person who never activates us and more about becoming capable of conscious participation with another human being. Of course, compatibility matters. Of course, safety matters. Of course, some relationships should end. But no relationship is free of all activation, because intimacy touches the places where we are most human. The aim is not to find a bond that never reveals anything difficult. The aim is to build or choose bonds where what is revealed can be met with enough honesty, care, responsibility, and freedom that both people become more whole rather than more defended. So the scientific and psychological integration of the series is this. Love is an embodied relational field. It is co-regulation, neuroception, attachment mapping, emotional memory, chemistry, repair, boundaries, differentiation, and learned capacity. It is the body asking whether it is safe to open. It is the nervous system remembering what happened before. It is the psyche projecting what it longs for. It is behavior teaching the body what to expect. It is rupture testing whether trust can be rebuilt. It is grief showing where identity was placed. It is a repair showing whether the bond can mature. And when all of that becomes conscious, love becomes alchemical. Not because the body disappears. Not because fear disappears. Not because chemistry, jealousy, longing, or grief disappear. But because they are no longer left in the dark. They become part of the conversation. They become part of the practice. They become awareness material. And perhaps a conscious relationship is not one where both people are always calm, healed, secure, and perfectly regulated. Perhaps it is one where two imperfect nervous systems can keep returning to truth, where activation can be named before it becomes harmful, where rupture can become repair, where projection can become integration, where freedom can coexist with devotion, where love is not only felt in the high moments, but built in the moments where two people choose consciousness over repetition. That is the integrated relational nervous system. Not a fantasy of perfect harmony, but a living field where love becomes more honest, because the body, mind, heart, language, and nervous system are finally being listened to together. The mirror layer, love as projection, revelation, and integration. If the scientific and psychological layer brings the body back into the center of love, the mirror layer brings the psyche back into view. Because love does not only happen between two people, it also happens between two inner worlds, two histories, two imaginations, two sets of wounds, two symbolic landscapes, two bodies carrying memory, but also two minds carrying meaning. This has been one of the central threads of the series. The other person is never only the other person. They may be real, present, separate, and human. But inside us, they may also become a mirror, a regulator, a wound, an archetype, a fantasy, a witness, a rival, a savior, a threat, a future, or an identity anchor. We do not always meet people cleanly. We meet them through everything we have already lived, everything we have not yet grieved, everything we secretly long for, and everything we fear may never be ours. That does not make love false. It makes love layered. The mistake is not that we project. Projection is part of human perception. We are always making meaning from partial information. We see a face, hear a tone, notice a gesture, feel an atmosphere, and the mind begins completing the picture. The body senses, the psyche interprets, memory contributes, desire colors, fear edits, and before we realize it, another person is carrying more symbolic meaning than they may have actually shown. The question is not whether projection exists. The question is whether we become conscious of it before it governs the bond. Love as projection begins when another person becomes the carrier of something inside us. They may become home before they have proven safety. They may become destiny before they have shown consistency. They may become rescued before they have shown capacity. They may become the future before the present has been tested. They may become proof of worth before we have learned to hold worth within ourselves. They may become the ones who will heal the old wound, reverse the old abandonment, choose us where someone else did not, see us where someone else missed us, and stay where someone else left. This is why attraction can feel so powerful in the early stages. The person may not only be attractive, they may be symbolic. They may represent possibility, redemption, sexual awakening, emotional safety, status, softness, danger, mystery, approval, freedom, or belonging. We may not yet know them deeply, but the psyche begins building a world around them. A text becomes meaningful. A look becomes evidence. A coincidence becomes a sign. A shared wound becomes destiny. A moment of intensity becomes proof that something rare is happening. Sometimes something rare is happening. Sometimes a person really does profoundly meet us. Sometimes recognition is not only projection. Sometimes the field is mutual, the timing is significant, the body relaxes, the heart opens, and something real begins. But even then, projection may still be present. The alchemy of love is not about stripping the connection of magic. It is about asking where the magic belongs. Is it in the person? In the field between us? In the parts of myself they have awakened? In the old wound they have touched? In the future I am imagining? In the body's chemistry? In the story I need this connection to become? This is where love as revelation begins. The person may reveal something before they become anything. They may reveal what we desire. They may reveal what we fear. They may reveal what kind of attention alters our state. They may reveal where we feel unworthy, where we chase, where we withdraw, where we perform, where we attach, where we want to be rescued, where we want to rescue, and where we confuse being chosen with being healed. In episode 4, The Mirror Effect, we explore this directly. Attraction can become a mirror. Another person can reveal hidden parts of ourselves. In episode 12, Soulmates and Shadow Attraction, that mirror became more intense because some people do not simply reflect desire, they reflect unfinished pain. They arrive carrying the emotional weather of an old wound. The body says, I know this, and the mind calls it fate. The attraction feels charged because something in the self is trying to complete an old story through a new person. This is why the mirror layer is so important in the final episode. It allows us to honor the meaning of connection without handing all of that meaning to the other person. Someone can matter deeply because of what they revealed. They may awaken creativity, tenderness, desire, grief, courage, sensuality, compassion, anger, or buried longing. They may show us where we are alive. They may show us where we are defended. They may show us where the body still does not know how to feel safe. They may show us how much we want to be chosen. They may show us how quickly we give away our center when love appears. But the fact that someone reveals something does not mean they are responsible for completing it. This distinction is one of the foundations of a relational alchemy. A person may be the mirror, but they are not always the destination. They may be the catalyst, but not the companion. They may be the spark, but not the structure. They may be the figure who opens a hidden room inside us, but not the person who is able to live there with care, consistency, and truth. A mirror reveals. Mutuality builds. A mirror activates. Mutuality participates. A mirror shows us something. Mutuality asks whether both people can meet what has been shown. That is why a meaningful connection still has to meet reality. It still has to meet behavior, communication, accountability, repair, emotional maturity, shared values, timing, capacity, and willingness. Meaning alone is not enough. Chemistry alone is not enough. Projection alone is not enough. Even spiritual recognition, if it exists, is not enough by itself. Love as a living relationship has to move beyond symbolic force into embodied practice. This is where projection becomes dangerous if it remains unconscious. If another person has become the carrier of our worth, then their distance becomes annihilation. If they carry our future, then their uncertainty becomes terror. If they carry our healing, then their absence becomes proof that we are broken again. If they carry our fantasy of being chosen, then their failure to choose us may feel like the collapse of identity. If they carry the archetype of savior, muse, divine masculine, divine feminine, or soulmate, we may excuse behavior that we would otherwise see clearly. Projection can make the person too meaningful to question. When someone becomes too meaningful to question, discernment weakens. We may explain away the inconsistency. We may spiritualize absence. We may mistake small signals for major evidence. We may call it pain transformation. We may call obsession devotion. We may call it longing intuition. We may call the wound destiny because the alternative would require grief. The alchemy begins when projection is reclaimed. To reclaim projection does not mean the connection was meaningless. It means we bring the meaning back into consciousness. We ask, what did I place onto this person? What did I need them to represent? What future did I build through them? What pain did I hope they would heal? What part of myself did I only feel when they looked at me? What quality did I believe belonged to them that may also be trying to awaken in me? This is where love becomes integration. If someone awakened tenderness, that tenderness is not theirs alone. If someone awakened desire, the desire came through your own body. If someone awakened creativity, the creativity did not belong to them. If someone made you feel alive, they may have helped open something, but the aliveness was also yours. If someone became the symbol of home, the longing for home may be something you now have to build in yourself and in your wider life, not only seek through one person. This does not reduce the person, it returns the self. Integration is the act of taking back the life force that projection placed outside. It is the movement from they are the source of what I felt to they helped reveal what I am capable of feeling. It is the movement from they are my only future to they awakened a future energy that I now have to reclaim. It is the movement from without them I am nothing to something in me became organized around them, and now I need to bring that part home. This was central in episode 14, where breakups were explored as ego death. When the relationship ends, the self may collapse not only because the person is gone, but because so much of the self had been mirrored through them. The partner may have become a regulator, witness, identity anchor, future image, or proof of worth. The breakup then reveals what had been outsourced. It reveals what the bond was holding. It reveals what must now be grieved, reclaimed, and reconstructed. But integration is not only needed after breakups. It is needed inside relationships too. In an ongoing relationship, integration means refusing to make the other person carry every disowned part of the self. It means noticing when we are asking them to regulate a wound they did not create. It means noticing when we are responding to their present behavior through an old story. It means noticing when they have become parent, savior, enemy, judge, proof, threat, or cure. It means bringing those meanings into awareness so the real person can breathe again. Because one of the most loving things we can do is let the other person become human again. Not the fantasy, not the projection, not the archetype, not the solution, not the source of all pain, not the proof of all worth. Human, a person with their own history, limits, fears, desires, wounds, defenses, mistakes, and becoming. A person who may love us and still fail us at times. A person who may matter deeply and still not be able to meet every need. A person who may reveal something profound without being responsible for everything it reveals. This does not mean lowering standards. It does not mean accepting harm. It does not mean tolerating disrespect because everyone is human. Seeing someone as human must include seeing their behavior clearly. Sometimes the human truth is that someone is not safe, not available, not honest, not capable, not willing, not aligned, not ready, not someone we can build with. Humanizing someone does not mean excusing them. It means removing the fantasy so reality can be seen. This is why the mirror layer also asks us to distinguish between revelation and relationship. A person may reveal their longing, but a relationship requires mutual care. A person may reveal their sexuality, but a relationship requires respect. A person may reveal our wound, but a relationship requires safety. A person may reveal our spiritual imagination, but a relationship requires behavior. A person may reveal our capacity to love, but a relationship requires two people choosing with consistency. Love after illusion does not abandon revelation. It simply asks for revelation to become integrated rather than worshipped. Another part of the mirror layer is the person as witness. To be loved is partly to be witnessed. Someone sees our private rhythms, our vulnerabilities, our contradictions, our ordinary humanity. They know the stories behind our expressions. They hear the voice we do not use publicly. They become part of how we experience ourselves. In healthy love, this witnessing can be deeply healing. It can help bring hidden parts of the self into the light. It can make the person feel less alone in their own inner world. But a witness can also become dependent if we believe we only exist when reflected by that person. If their attention becomes the only place where we feel real, their absence becomes erasure. If their desire becomes the only mirror for our body, their withdrawal becomes bodily shame. If their understanding becomes the only proof that our story matters, their departure becomes the loss of self. Again, the mirror is not wrong. We need mirrors. We need a witness. But conscious love asks us not to place the whole self inside one reflection. This is why relational alchemy includes building multiple forms of witness: friendship, community, creative work, self-reflection, spiritual practice, therapy, embodied awareness, meaningful work, and honest solitude. A romantic partner may be a profound witness, but they cannot be the only mirror through which the self exists. When one person becomes the entire mirror, love becomes fragile. The self becomes dependent on its gaze. The alchemy of love brings the gaze home. It asks us to become more capable of witnessing ourselves, not in isolation, not in denial of relational need, but with enough inner presence that another person's love expands the self rather than creates the self from nothing. This also changes how we understand conflict. When conflict happens, we often think we are arguing only about the issue, the message, the tone, the lateness, the ex, the money, the silence, the household task, the boundary, the plan. But often beneath the issue, mirrors are colliding. One person is feeling unseen. Another is feeling controlled. One is feeling abandoned. Another is feeling engulfed. One is feeling criticized. Another is feeling ignored. The present issue becomes a mirror for an older fear. This is why conflict can escalate so quickly. People are not only defending their position, they are defending their identity, wound, and nervous system interpretation. A small disagreement becomes evidence of not being cared for. A request becomes evidence of being controlled. A boundary becomes evidence of rejection. A need becomes evidence of burden. The other person is no longer only a partner, they become the figure through whom the wound speaks. In conscious love, the question becomes, what is this conflict reflecting? What is being mirrored back to each of us? What part of me is reacting to the present, and what part of me is reacting to history? What am I making you represent right now? What are you making me represent? Can we return from symbol to human? That last question matters. Can we return from symbol to human? So much relational suffering comes from being trapped in symbolic roles. The partner becomes the abandoning parent, the betraying ex, the controlling authority, the needy child, the unavailable beloved, the rival, the judge, the rescuer, the threat. Once someone is cast into a symbolic role, we stop meeting them freshly. We respond to the role. We defend against the role. We attack the role. We pursue the role. We collapse under the role. Alchemy returns us to the present by making the symbolic role visible. It says, this feels like abandonment, but is abandonment actually happening? This feels like control, but is control actually happening? This feels like betrayal, but what evidence exists? This feels like destiny, but what behavior supports it? This feels like rejection, but what was actually said? This feels like danger, but is the danger in the present or in memory? This does not mean invalidating the feeling. It means locating it accurately. Feelings are as real as experiences, but they may not always be as accurate as interpretations. Conscious love respects the feeling while investigating the story. The mirror layer also helps us understand why some relationships transform us even when they do not last. A connection can reveal a hidden part of the self so powerfully that life is never quite the same afterwards. The person may not become a partner, they may not remain, they may not even have understood the role they played, but something was revealed, a design, a voice, a boundary, a pattern, a longing, a creative force, a truth. When integrated, these relationships become part of the soul's education, not in a sentimental way, but in a deeply practical one. They show us what we need to see to become more conscious. They show us where we were asleep, where we were hungry, where we were projecting. We were still waiting for someone else to permit us to exist, where we had confused intensity with love, or safety with boredom, or distance with value. But if not integrated, these same relationships become loops. We keep returning to the person, the fantasy, the pain, or the story. We keep calling them destiny because we have not yet reclaimed what they awakened. We keep seeking closure because we have not yet brought the projection home. We keep feeling haunted because a part of the self remains attached to the reflection. This is why integration is the opposite of haunting. A haunting is a memory, person, or bond that remains unfinished in the nervous system and symbolic imagination. Integration allows the meaning to be carried without the person remaining the center. The person may still matter, the memory may still be charged, but it no longer governs the whole field. It becomes part of the self-story rather than the force that controls it. This is the mirror layer's gift. It shows us that love is not only about finding the right other, it is also about becoming truthful in the presence of another. It asks us to see what the other person evokes and then take responsibility for our relationship to that evocation. It asks us not to make another person the sole owner of our longing, pain, desire, future, or healing. It asks us to let them reveal but not replace the self. And when this happens, love becomes more mutual, because if I am no longer asking you to be my entire mirror, I can see you more clearly. If I am no longer demanding that you heal my oldest wound, I can meet your humanity with less distortion. If I am no longer making your desire the proof of my worth, I can receive your love without turning it into a life support system. If I am no longer using you as the carrier of my future, I can build a future with you more freely. This is love without erasure. Love without erasure does not mean weak love. It does not mean casual love. It does not mean shallow independence. It means a love where both people can matter profoundly without either becoming consumed. A love where the bond is deep, but the self remains present. A love where intimacy does not require disappearance. A love where devotion does not require self-abandonment. A love where two people can mirror one another without losing the ability to stand separately. This is perhaps one of the most mature forms of relational alchemy, to allow someone to change us without handing them authorship over our lives. To allow someone to awaken us without making them responsible for our awakening. To allow someone to love us without making them the source of our worth. To allow someone to leave if they leave, without believing all that they awakened has left with them. The other person can matter deeply. They can shape us. They can become part of our story. They can reveal parts of us we may never have found alone. But conscious love asks that what is revealed becomes integrated into the self, not permanently outsourced to the bond. So the key insight of this mirror layer is simple, but not easy. The alchemy of love begins when the other person is allowed to be human again, and the projected self is brought home. Love becomes more conscious when we can say, "You revealed something in me, but you do not own it. You mattered, but you are not the whole source of my meaning. You touched my wound, but you are not automatically the one who must heal it. You awakened my desire, but my aliveness belongs to me too. You mirrored my future, but I must still choose how to live." This is not the end of romance. It is romance with clearer eyes. It is a mystery with integration. It is an attraction with self-knowledge. It is intimacy without collapse. It is devotion without erasure. And perhaps this is one of the final movements of the whole series. To meet love not as a place where the self disappears into another person, but as a field where the self becomes more visible, more honest, more responsible, and more alive. Cultural and digital layer. Love in the age of infinite access. If the mirror layer asks what we project onto another person, the cultural and digital layer asks what kind of world those projections now live inside. Because love no longer unfolds only through family, community, local encounter, work, friendship circles, shared spaces, or embodied chants. It unfolds inside feeds, profiles, algorithms, dating apps, notifications, direct messages, story views, pornography, parasocial intimacy, AI companionship, comparison fields, and endless visibility. The modern relational field has changed. And because the field has changed, the nervous system is being trained differently. This has been one of the strongest cultural threads of the series. Love is not only personal, it is environmental. The way people meet, compare, choose, desire, communicate, perform, leave, grieve, and replace one another is shaped by the systems around them. If the environment rewards speed, attention, novelty, visibility, performance, and constant availability, then love has to fight harder to remain slow, embodied, private, patient, and real. The modern world gives us more access to people than ever before. More profiles, more images, more potential partners, more conversations, more ways to flirt, more ways to reconnect with the past, more ways to watch someone from a distance, more ways to receive validation without intimacy, more ways to soothe loneliness without mutual presence, more ways to consume desire without a relationship, more ways to simulate closeness without being truly met. And the question is not simply whether this is good or bad. That would be too simple. Technology can genuinely help people connect. People meet partners online. Long-distance relationships survive through digital contact. Isolated people find communities. Those who may never have crossed paths can discover one another. A message can become a doorway. A profile can become a beginning. A voice note can carry warmth. A digital space can help someone feel less alone. But technology also alters the conditions of attention. It changes what the nervous system expects. It trains people to scan, compare, select, reject, wait, check, monitor, and interpret signals. The danger is not merely that people use technology. The danger is that technology begins to shape desire before people realize desire has been shaped. This is love in the age of infinite access. The first cultural shift is the marketplace of attention. Modern love is surrounded by metrics, likes, matches, views, replies, follows, comments, shares, reactions, message speed, online status, profile visibility, and the endless subtle ranking of who is being noticed by whom. These signals may seem small, but the body can treat them as evidence. Evidence of desirability, evidence of being chosen, evidence of being ignored, evidence of competition, evidence of value. When attention becomes measurable, worth can become unstable. A person may begin to feel attractive when the signals are there and invisible when they are not. A match can feel like proof. Silence can feel like rejection. A view can feel like an interest. A like can feel like desire. A delayed reply can feel like abandonment. The nervous system starts reading the platform as if it were a relational mirror. But the mirror is distorted. It reflects algorithms, timing, presentation, beauty standards, social habits, anxiety, boredom, and attention loops, not the whole truth of anyone's worth. This is why digital validation can become addictive. It offers small doses of relief. A match says you are still wanted. A message says you still matter. A reaction says you are visible. But because the relief is temporary, the body often wants another signal. The loop continues. The person may think they are seeking connection, but sometimes what they are really seeking is regulation through visibility. That is the first distortion. Validation begins impersonating intimacy. The second shift is infinite access with reduced presence. We have more ways to reach each other, but not always more capacity to meet each other. Access is not presence. Availability is not intimacy. Constant communication is not necessarily a connection. A person can reply all day and still not be emotionally present. They can be reachable but not reliable. They can be visible but not available. They can share details without becoming truly known. This was central in episode 11, the digital dating arena. A profile is not a person. A match is not a bond. A message is not present. A like is not intimacy. Access may open the door, but it does not build the house. And if we forget that, we begin confusing the signal with the relationship. The digital field is full of beginnings. Beginnings are exciting because they are still clean and mutual. The person has not disappointed us yet. The fantasy has not been tested. The chemistry exists in possibility. The projection has room to grow. There is always another profile, another conversation, another possible version of love waiting in the field. This can make actual intimacy harder, because actual intimacy requires staying with one person long enough for reality to arrive. Reality is slower than the feed. Reality includes awkwardness, timing, ordinary moments, emotional difference, misunderstanding, repair, limitation, and the gradual revelation of who someone really is. The feed offers the next possibility before the current person has been fully encountered. The nervous system can become trained towards novelty rather than depth, stimulation rather than presence, option rather than commitment. This is how infinite access can create emotional poverty. More people are visible, yet fewer people are truly met. The third shift is comparison as a relational virus. Digital culture places relationships inside constant comparison. Bodies, faces, lifestyles, homes, holidays, sexual desirability, romantic gestures, family images, couple performances, status symbols, personal branding, beauty filters, gym bodies, wealth displays, and curated happiness. Even when people know these images are partial, the nervous system still absorbs them. Comparison enters the body quietly. Am I attractive enough? Is my relationship exciting enough? Are they more desired than I? Could I do better? Could they do better? Should love look more passionate, more aesthetic, more publicly celebrated, more sexually charged, more spiritually aligned, more successful? The comparison field creates dissatisfaction, not always because anything is wrong, but because reality is being measured against endless curated alternatives. This affects both attraction and commitment. Attraction becomes shaped by repeated exposure to idealized images. Commitment becomes harder because ordinary love can seem less impressive than the digital fantasy of other people's lives. A real partner's humanity competes with the edited image of strangers. A real relationship's complexity competes with highlight reels. A real body competes with filters, performance, pornography, and fantasy. A real emotional bond competes with the dopamine of novelty and the myth of endless upgrade. Comparison not only makes people insecure, it can make them restless. It teaches the mind to keep asking, is there better? And when the nervous system is trained to keep looking for better, the person in front of us may never be allowed to become fully real. The fourth shift is parasocial and AI intimacy. The future of human connection will not only involve human relationships. It will increasingly include simulated closeness, artificial responsiveness, algorithmically shaped companions, online creators, influencers, digital teachers, streamers, erotic performers, and one-sided emotional bonds. This does not need to be treated with simple panic, but it must be taken seriously. Parasocial intimacy can feel comforting because it provides emotional rhythm without mutual demand. A creator speaks regularly, their voice becomes familiar, their vulnerability feels personal, their presence enters the home, the phone, the private emotional field. The viewer may feel seen by someone who does not know them. There can be comfort in that, but there can also be substitution. The nervous system may begin preferring connections where it does not have to risk being known. AI companionship takes this further. A responsive system can mirror warmth, attention, interest, flirtation, emotional validation, and availability. It can feel safer than human love because it does not abandon ordinarily, does not disagree with the same emotional weight, does not have a body with its own needs, and does not require mutual sacrifice. For some, it may be a support, a reflective tool, or even a bridge out of isolation. But if it replaces human mutuality, it may train people away from the difficult beauty of real relationships. Real intimacy involves another center of experience, another nervous system, another history, another will, another set of needs, another person who cannot be fully controlled, customized, predicted, or edited. This is precisely what makes human love frustrating, but also transformative. We grow because the other is real. If future intimacy becomes too controlled, too frictionless, too responsive, too tailored to the self, then it may soothe loneliness while avoiding relational growth. This is one of the great future questions. Will technology help us return to human connection, or will it become a substitute that makes human complexity feel intolerable? The fifth shift is digital ghosts and unfinished bonds. In the past, endings had traces, letters, places, photographs, memory. But now the past remains searchable. Old messages, voice notes, photographs, playlists, tagged posts, archived chats, location memories, profiles, status updates, mutual followers, and algorithmic reminders can keep a dead relationship digitally alive. The body is trying to learn absence, while the phone keeps offering fragments of presence. This affects grief, it affects jealousy, it affects closure, it affects identity reconstruction. A person can remain attached through surveillance, checking, rereading, decoding, and watching. They may not contact the ex, but they continue relating to them through data. The bond is over in reality, but active in the nervous system because the digital field keeps reopening it. This is why digital hygiene is becoming part of emotional hygiene. Muting, unfollowing, archiving, deleting, blocking, or stepping away are not always acts of bitterness. Sometimes they are acts of nervous system care. The body cannot integrate an ending if it is constantly re-entering the world that ended. Conscious love and conscious grief both require knowing when access is no longer serving presence, truth, or healing. The sixth shift is the sexualization and commodification of desire. Pornography, sexualized feeds, OnlyFans-type intimacy, thirst traps, eroticized attention economies, and body-based branding have changed the field of sexual imagination. Again, the point is not simplistic moral panic. The question is conditioning. What happens when desire is trained towards endless novelty, performance, comparison, and consumption? What happens when real intimacy has to compete with digital sexual intensity? What happens when bodies become content before they are encountered as persons? Desire itself is not the problem. Sexuality is part of human life. Beauty, eros, fantasy, and bodily attraction can be powerful and sacred. The problem emerges when desire becomes detached from personhood, when the body becomes only an image, when attention becomes extraction, when arousal becomes consumption without encounter, when a partner's ordinary humanity begins to feel less stimulating than the endless feed of novelty, when people begin to internalize that their value lies in how visibly desirable they can be. This affects relationships because the sexual imagination is not separate from the relational nervous system. What we repeatedly consume can shape what we expect, what we compare, what we fear, and what we struggle to feel in embodied intimacy. If desire becomes too trained by the screen, ordinary vulnerability may feel too slow, real bodies may feel too real, mutual sexuality may feel too emotionally demanding, presence may feel less stimulating than performance. So the cultural question becomes, can desire remain human in systems that constantly turn it into content? The seventh shift is algorithmic desire. Algorithms do not only show us what we want, they shape what becomes familiar, desirable, threatening, normal, or invisible. If the feed repeatedly shows certain bodies, lifestyles, gender scripts, relationship ideals, sexual aesthetics, soulmate narratives, breakup content, jealousy triggers, or ideological explanations of love, the nervous system begins learning a pattern. The algorithm becomes a silent educator of desire. This is why we cannot separate personal attraction from cultural input. People may think they are simply choosing freely, but the field has been training the eye. It has been repeating certain images, certain values, certain fears, certain fantasies, certain scripts. It tells us what is desirable. It tells us what is embarrassing. It tells us what a high-value person looks like. It tells us what love should feel like. It tells us who is winning the relationship marketplace. It tells us what we should want before we have asked what truly nourishes us. The future of human connection will require embodied discernment against algorithmic conditioning. Not rejecting technology entirely, but asking, what is this feed training me to desire? What is it training me to fear? What is it making me compare? What kind of love does it make seem normal? What kind of human being does it make invisible? Does it return me to presence or pull me further into performance? This leads to the final cultural question. How do we preserve human depth inside systems designed for attention, stimulation, ranking, and replacement? The answer cannot be nostalgia. We are not going back to a pre-digital world. Technology is part of the relational environment now. The answer has to be consciousness within the field. Slower use, clearer boundaries, more embodied meeting, more honest language, more awareness of validation loops, more protection of attention, more willingness to let the screen become a doorway, not the relationship itself. To love consciously in the age of infinite access means remembering that a person is not a profile, an option, a fantasy, a body, a metric, a signal, a projection, or a digital trace. A person is a living field, a nervous system, a history, a body, a consciousness, a set of wounds and hopes, a life that cannot be fully known through an interface. It means remembering that the body still needs presence, the heart still needs truth, the nervous system still needs consistency and repair, desire still needs personhood, grief still needs space, intimacy still needs risk, devotion still needs freedom, love still needs to be lived beyond the signal. Technology can help us find each other, but only consciousness can help us meet each other. That is the cultural and digital integration of the series. The future of love depends on whether technology becomes a doorway to connection or a substitute for embodied relational courage. If technology becomes a doorway, it may expand our possibilities. If it becomes a substitute, it may train us to prefer access over presence, validation over intimacy, fantasy over reality, and stimulation over depth. The choice is not made once. It is made every time we open the app, check the signal, compare the body, watch the feed, revisit the ghost, seek the validation, or choose whether to meet the living person beyond the screen. Love in the age of infinite access will require discipline of attention, reverence for embodiment, protection of intimacy, clearer digital boundaries, more courage to meet, more willingness to slow down, more refusal to let the machinery of visibility define worth, because the connection may begin through a screen. But love, if it is to become alchemical, must eventually return us to presence in person. The phenomenological and spiritual layer, sacred love without illusion after moving through the body, the nervous system, the psyche, the mirror, the digital field, and the cultural machinery now shaping attraction, we arrive again at the spiritual layer. But by this point in the series, spirituality has to mean something more grounded than fantasy. It cannot simply mean signs, destiny, soulmates, synchronicity, or the feeling that a connection is larger than ordinary life. Those things may have their place. Some connections do feel meaningful. Some encounters do seem timed. Some people arrive with symbolic force. Some bonds awaken the body, the heart, the imagination, the wound, and the soul in ways that cannot be fully explained through biology or psychology alone. But the final episode has to ask what sacred love means after illusion has been seen. Because sacred love cannot simply be intense love. It cannot simply be painful love. It cannot simply be chemistry with spiritual language around it. It cannot simply be longing that has learned to call itself destiny. It cannot simply be possession dressed as devotion, or fear dressed as loyalty, or unresolved attachment dressed as divine timing. If love is sacred, then it must become more honest, not less. It must bring us closer to reality, not further away from it. It must make us more capable of truth, not more dependent on fantasy. It must deepen our humanity, not make us disappear into another person. This is where the final spiritual layer begins. Sacred love is not the love that avoids reality. It is the love that can survive reality without losing its soul. That sentence matters because so much romantic and spiritual language teaches us, directly or indirectly, that real love should feel extraordinary all the time. It should feel fated, charged, overwhelming, transformative, undeniable, cosmic, consuming. It should rescue us from ordinary life. It should make every previous wound meaningful. It should complete the story. It should give us the feeling that we have finally arrived somewhere beyond loneliness, beyond fear, beyond uncertainty, beyond ourselves. But love is not only found in the extraordinary, it is also found in the ordinary reality of presence, in the way someone shows up, in the way they repair, in the way they speak when they are tired, in the way they handle disappointment, in the way they respect a boundary, in the way they remain honest when the truth is inconvenient, in the way they allow another person to be separate without withdrawing love, in the way desire becomes care, and care becomes behavior, and behavior becomes trust. Sacred love may include mystery, but it cannot live on mystery alone. It must eventually meet communication, consistency, responsibility, consent, truth, mutuality, and embodied presence. Otherwise, the sacred story becomes a beautiful hiding place. We call the bond divine because we cannot admit it is unavailable. We call the pain initiation because we cannot admit it is repeated harm. We call the silence energetic communication because we cannot admit that there is no real conversation. We call the waiting devotion because we cannot admit we are afraid to grieve. This does not mean the mystery is false. It means mystery needs discernment. A connection can be meaningful without being healthy. A person can be a mirror without being a partner. A bond can change us without being meant to continue. A moment can be synchronistic without becoming a command. A person can awaken something profound and still not be capable of meeting us with maturity. One of the most difficult lessons in love is that significance and suitability are not the same thing. Some people are significant because they reveal where we are alive. Some are significant because they reveal where we are wounded. Some are significant because they open desire. Some because they open grief. Some because they show us a pattern. Some because they break a pattern. Some because they teach us what love is. Others because they teach us what love is not. The spiritual mistake is assuming that significance always means permanence. The conscious interpretation is more subtle. This mattered. And I still have to ask what form it is meant to take in reality. This is why sacred love requires humility. It asks us not to rush too quickly into certainty. When someone feels important, the ego often wants a conclusion. They are my soulmate. They are my destiny. They are the one. This is meant. This will return. This pain has a divine purpose. But humility says, something is happening here, and I do not yet know exactly what it means. That is a very different posture. It keeps mystery alive without letting mystery override observation. It leaves room for the body, the heart, the behavior, the timing, the communication, the wounds, and the real person to reveal themselves. In this sense, discernment is not the enemy of spirituality. Discernment is spiritual maturity. It is the capacity to honor what feels meaningful without surrendering self-respect. It is the ability to feel the pull and still ask whether the bond is mutual. It is the ability to experience synchronicity and still ask whether the person is honest. It is the ability to feel chemistry and still ask whether the relationship can be repaired. It is the ability to feel longing and still ask whether the longing is love, projection, attachment, or familiar pain. A spirituality of love without discernment becomes dangerous because it can sanctify self-abandonment. It can tell people to wait when they need to grieve. It can tell people to endure when they need to leave. It can tell people to decode signs when they need a conversation. It can tell people to call pain sacred when their body is asking for safety. And when spiritual language is used this way, it does not expand consciousness. It protects the wound from being named. Sacred love asks for the opposite. It asks that nothing be hidden from the truth. Not the chemistry, not the fear, not the jealousy, not the projection, not the power imbalance, not the avoidance, not the loneliness, not the desire to possess, not the need to be chosen, not the digital validation loop, not the grief, not the body's memory, not the part of us that wants to call repetition destiny, because repetition feels familiar. When love becomes truly sacred, it becomes a field where truth is invited, not avoided. This is where devotion becomes important again. Devotion is not obsession. It is not waiting indefinitely for someone who does not meet us. It is not collapsing our life around an unavailable person. It is not treating loyalty as obedience. It is not allowing another person to become the authority over our worth, body, future, or healing. Devotion is chosen presence. It is care made real. It is love that becomes behavior. It is truth honored over fantasy. It is the willingness to protect what is alive without possessing what is free. Devotion, at its healthiest, has both warmth and spine. It can be tender, but it is not weak. It can be loyal, but not blind. It can be patient, but not self-erasing. It can forgive, but not deny repeated harm. It can stay, but only where staying remains conscious. It can leave, if leaving is what truth requires. This is why devotion is not measured only by endurance. Sometimes people endure because they are devoted to love. Sometimes they endure because they are afraid of abandonment. Sometimes they endure because the wound has confused suffering with depth. Conscious devotion has to know the difference. This also means that sacred love does not demand possession. If love is sacred, it must remain connected to freedom. This does not mean casualness, avoidance, or lack of commitment. It does not mean using freedom as a way to avoid care. It means that love must be chosen, not extracted. It must be given, not forced. It must be alive, not controlled into compliance. As episode 13 explored, possession begins when fear tries to turn another person into territory. But a person is not territory. A person may commit, choose, devote, and build with us, but they remain a living being. If their freedom has to be destroyed for us to feel safe, then what we are protecting is not love. It is fear. This is one of the hardest spiritual truths in a relationship. Love asks us to open to someone we cannot fully own. We can make agreements. We can honor boundaries. We can build trust. We can expect honesty. We can leave when those things are violated. But we cannot turn a human being into an object of certainty. The vulnerability of love is that the other person remains free. Their choice is meaningful precisely because it remains a choice. Devotion without freedom is not devotion. It is captivity wearing romantic language. Sacred love also requires the alchemy of pain. Every relationship will bring pain in some form. Not necessarily abuse, betrayal, or repeated harm, but the ordinary pains of being human with another person. Misunderstanding, difference, disappointment, limitation, fear, vulnerability, grief, rupture, conflict, change, and sometimes ending. The question is not whether pain appears. The question is what happens to it. Is pain metabolized or romanticized? Is it brought into consciousness or used as proof of destiny? Is it allowed to teach, or does it become an identity? Does it open compassion, boundaries, and self-knowledge, or does it harden into cynicism, possession, ideology, or spiritual bypassing? Pain becomes alchemical when it is held honestly. Jealousy becomes alchemical when it reveals what feels threatened without turning the beloved into property. Chemistry becomes alchemical when it teaches us about the body without making intensity the only measure of truth. Projection becomes alchemical when what we placed onto another is reclaimed and integrated. Heartbreak becomes alchemical when grief reconstructs the self instead of permanently trapping us in loss. Digital distortion becomes alchemical when it teaches us the difference between access and presence. Soulmate longing becomes alchemical when mystery is held with discernment rather than used to avoid reality. But pain that is not metabolized repeats. It returns as the same attraction to the same wound in a new body. It returns as jealousy in a new relationship. It returns as cynicism after heartbreak. It returns as a spiritual obsession. It returns as a need for control. It returns as avoidance disguised as freedom. It returns as the inability to trust good love, because chaos feels more familiar than calm. So sacred love is not the absence of pain. It is the transformation of pain into consciousness, without letting pain become the God we worship. This is where relational consciousness becomes the spiritual practice of love. A conscious relationship is not only about two people who care about each other. It is two people becoming aware of the field they create together. The field includes tone, timing, touch, silence, repair, desire, fear, roles, old wounds, digital behaviors, boundaries, and the way each person's state affects the other. To become conscious in a relationship is to stop treating the bond as a random collision of emotions and begin noticing the living system being formed. What happens to us when we are together? What state do we create? What patterns repeat? What roles do we fall into? What fears do we activate? What parts of us become more alive? What parts become smaller? What do we repair well? What do we avoid? What do we keep pretending not to know? What does our love ask from our bodies, our language, our honesty, our discipline, our freedom, our grief? These are spiritual questions because they ask us to bring awareness to the place where we are most likely to become unconscious. Love is one of the great spiritual tests, not because it is always blissful, but because it reveals the distance between who we imagine ourselves to be and who we become when we are attached, afraid, desired, disappointed, or vulnerable. It is easy to believe we are conscious when no one has touched the wound. It is easy to believe we are free when no one matters enough to threaten our defenses. It is easy to believe we are loving when love has not yet asked us to repair. Relationship brings the hidden material into the room. That is why love can become sacred, not because it rescues us from ourselves, but because it brings us into contact with ourselves so directly that avoidance becomes harder. A person we love can show us where we are generous, where we are afraid, where we are still children, where we are wise, where we manipulate, where we abandon ourselves, where we control, where we protect, where we need, where we withhold, where we long, where we do not yet know how to receive. If held unconsciously, this becomes drama. If held consciously, it becomes initiation. The future of sacred love, then, may not look like the old fantasies. It may not be about finding the perfect other who completes the self. It may be about becoming capable of meeting another imperfect human being without making them the container for all our unlived life. It may be about allowing love to reveal the unfinished places while staying responsible for the work of integrating them. It may be about bringing the soul into the ordinary, how we speak, how we listen, how we repair, how we leave, how we stay, how we grieve, how we tell the truth. This is sacred love without illusion. It does not deny chemistry, but it does not worship it. It does not deny destiny, but it does not use destiny to bypass behavior. It does not deny longing, but it does not turn longing into proof. It does not deny freedom, but it does not use freedom to avoid responsibility. It does not deny devotion, but it does not confuse devotion with self-erasure. It does not deny grief, but it does not make grief the whole identity. It asks love to become real enough to hold both mystery and evidence, both body and soul, both desire and discipline, both tenderness and boundary, both connection and selfhood, both surrender and discernment, both the ache to merge and the need to remain. And perhaps that is the final spiritual integration. Love is not sacred because it removes us from being human. Love is sacred because it brings us more deeply into the truth of being human. It shows us that we are bodies and stories, wounds and longings, instincts and choices, chemistry and consciousness, memory and possibility. It shows us that connection can open us, but it can also expose us. It shows us that to love consciously is not to escape vulnerability, but to meet vulnerability without turning it into possession, fantasy, or harm. So if there is such a thing as sacred love, perhaps it is not the love that never doubts, never hurts, never changes, never grieves, or never struggles. Perhaps it is the love that remains committed to truth inside all of that. The love that can say, I feel this deeply, and I will still look clearly. The love that can say, you matter to me, and I will not make you responsible for every wound in me. The love that can say, I choose you freely, and I want to be chosen freely. The love that can say, if this ends I will grieve, but I will not disappear forever. The love that can say, I want mystery, but not at the cost of reality. That is sacred love after illusion, not smaller love, not colder love, not love stripped of poetry, but love with a stronger spine, a clearer mirror, a more honest body, and a deeper soul. The future of connection, what love can become. If the final spiritual layer asks what sacred love becomes after illusion has been seen, then this next layer asks what love must become in the world we are now living in. Because love does not unfold in a vacuum. It unfolds inside a culture, inside an economy, inside a technological environment, inside social narratives, inside gender scripts, inside digital platforms, inside nervous systems shaped by stress, trauma, loneliness, comparison, overstimulation, and the erosion of embodied community. So when we speak about the future of human connection, we are not speaking only about individual couples. We are speaking about the conditions under which people now try to meet, bond, trust, desire, repair, grieve, and build a life with one another. The conditions have changed. Modern love is surrounded by infinite access but also deep isolation. More ways to contact, but fewer spaces where people are truly present. More dating options but more disposability. More sexual visibility, but often less embodied intimacy. More language around attachment and trauma, but sometimes less patience for the ordinary difficulty of being human. More spiritual language around soulmates and twin flames, but often less discernment around behavior. More public performance of love, but often less private repair. More validation signals, but not always more trust. This is why the future of connection cannot simply be about finding better partners. It has to be about developing better relational consciousness. We need to become more literate in what love is doing to us, and what we are doing inside love. The first movement is from performance to presence. Modern culture rewards performance. We perform desirability, we perform healing, we perform with confidence, we perform independence, we perform being unbothered, we perform romance, we perform successfully, we perform sexual value, we perform emotional intelligence, we perform spirituality, we perform being over it, we have options. We strive to be the kind of person others should want. The problem is not that people are fake in some simplistic way. The problem is that the environment trains people to become visible before they become present. It trains the self to ask, how am I being seen? How do I appear? How desirable do I look? How healed do I seem? How interesting, attractive, stable, mysterious, independent, or valuable am I in the eyes of others? But love does not mature through performance. It matures through presence. Presence is not an image. It is not a brand. It is not a profile. It is not an aesthetic. Presence is the capacity to actually be with another person, and with oneself without immediately escaping into defense, performance, control, comparison, fantasy, or distraction. Presence means I can hear you without preparing my defense before you finish speaking. I can feel my body without immediately obeying its fear. I can be seen without turning myself into a polished version of what I think you will approve of. I can sit in the ordinary reality of another person without needing them to become a fantasy. I can stay with discomfort long enough for truth to appear. The future of love needs more presence because the culture is pulling us towards performance. If relationships are built primarily on image, they will collapse when reality arrives. If attraction is built only on presentation, it may struggle with vulnerability. If intimacy is built on the version of the self that knows how to be seen, the hidden self remains lonely. So one question for the future is, can we become more present than performative? Can we meet another person as a living being rather than an audience? Can we allow ourselves to be known beyond the version of ourselves designed to be chosen? The second movement is from validation to regulation. A lot of modern relational behavior is actually regulation seeking. People seek attention because it calms the ache of invisibility. They seek matches because it soothes doubt around desirability. They seek messages because silence activates abandonment. They seek sexual attention because it briefly restores worth. They seek reassurance because the body does not yet know how to settle. They seek a partner not only to love, but to regulate what the self has not yet learned to hold. Again, this is a trait. We are not meant to be completely self-contained. We are relational beings. We regulate through one another. A loving voice can calm the body. A trusted presence can soften fear. A sincere repair can rebuild safety. But when another person becomes the only source of regulation, love becomes fragile. The relationship becomes less about meeting and more about soothing. The partner becomes a nervous system appliance. The bond becomes the place where every unprocessed fear must be managed. The future of love requires people to learn the difference between co-regulation and outsourcing. Co-regulation says, your presence helps me, and I also remain responsible for understanding my own state. Outsourcing says, you must keep me safe from every feeling I do not know how to hold. This distinction is essential. Without it, relationships become burdened by expectations they cannot survive. One person becomes responsible for another's self-worth. One becomes responsible for another's abandonment wound. One becomes responsible for another's jealousy, loneliness, identity, or emotional stability. Love becomes a service. Reassurance becomes labor. The relationship becomes exhausted. Conscious love does not remove the need for comfort. It deepens responsibility around it. It allows us to say, I need support, without saying, you must become my entire nervous system. It allows us to ask for reassurance without turning reassurance into a demand that never ends. It allows us to receive love without making love the only thing holding the self together. The third movement is from consumption to encounter. Modern dating culture can easily turn people into consumable objects. Profiles are consumed, images are consumed, bodies are consumed, conversations are sampled, possibilities are browsed. People are compared, ranked, selected, rejected, saved, ghosted, revisited, or replaced. Even spiritual and psychological language can become consumable. We consume content about love instead of practicing love. We consume explanations. Instead of entering an honest conversation, we consume fantasies of connection while avoiding the real risk of being known. Encounter is different. To encounter someone is to meet them as more than an option, more than a body, more than a projection, more than a type, more than content, more than a set of traits. It is to recognize that there is a world behind the face, a history behind the behavior, a nervous system behind the reaction, a person behind the desire. Encounter asks us to slow down. It asks us to stop reducing the other person too quickly. It asks us to remain curious, not naive, but curious. It asks us to recognize that every human being carries complexity that cannot be fully read from a profile, a photograph, a label, a role, or even a first impression. The future of connection needs a return to encounter because the machinery around us is training us to consume. It trains us to ask whether someone is useful, attractive, exciting, high value, low value, aligned, marketable, available, or replaceable. Encounter asks a deeper question. Can I meet this person as a living being without immediately turning them into an object inside my own needs? That does not mean abandoning discernment. We still need boundaries. We still need compatibility. We still need to choose carefully. But discernment is not the same as consumption. Discernment sees clearly. Consumption reduces. The fourth movement is from possession to freedom. Episode 13 showed us that jealousy often appears where love meets fear. The fear of losing, being replaced, being humiliated, being abandoned, or not being enough can create a desire to control. But the future of love cannot be built on possession. It cannot be built on surveillance, ownership, restriction, or the fantasy that another person can be made safe by removing their freedom. At the same time, the future of love cannot be built on avoidant freedom either. Freedom does not mean doing whatever we want without responsibility. It does not mean using autonomy as an excuse to avoid care. It does not mean refusing commitment while enjoying the benefits of devotion. It does not mean treating another person's heart as an inconvenience. The future of love needs a mature freedom. Freedom with responsibility, devotion with choice, commitment without ownership, boundaries without control. This may be one of the hardest relational balances to learn. People often swing between fusion and detachment. Either love means merging, owning, constantly reassuring, and becoming the center of one another's emotional world, or freedom means distance, avoidance, emotional minimalism, and the refusal to be accountable. Conscious love asks for something more difficult, two people choosing each other without disappearing into each other. To say, I choose you and remain a self. To say, I am free and still honor the bond. To say, I desire you without owning the body. To say, I need you without making need a prison. To say, I love you without asking love to erase uncertainty. Love is only sacred if it remains chosen. And choice is only meaningful if freedom still exists. The fifth movement is from trauma repetition to pattern awareness. Many people enter relationships without realizing they are entering old emotional maps. They are not only choosing a person, they are re-entering a pattern. The familiar distance, the familiar chase, the familiar intensity, the familiar chaos, the familiar need to prove worth, the familiar role of caretaker, rescuer, performer, avoider, controller, or abandoned one. The future of human connection requires pattern literacy, not so people can diagnose each other endlessly, but so they can stop mistaking repetition for fate. Without pattern awareness, the same wounds keep appearing in different relationships. The person changes, but the nervous system story remains similar. The same type of unavailable person, the same fear of being seen, the same tendency to pursue, the same tendency to withdraw, the same jealousy, the same collapse, the same overgiving, the same resentment, the same ending. Pattern awareness asks, what repeats? What role do I keep entering? What kind of person activates me? What do I confuse with love? What do I avoid? What do I chase? What state does my body associate with intimacy? What old wound is trying to complete itself through this person? This is not about blaming ourselves for every relationship. Some people are genuinely harmful. Some betrayals are real. Some endings are necessary. But pattern awareness returns agency where unconscious repetition has taken over. It allows us to see the architecture beneath the attraction, and once the pattern is seen, it can begin to change. The sixth movement is from algorithmic desire to embodied discernment. Algorithms increasingly shape what people see, desire, fear, compare, and believe. They do not only serve content, they train perception. They repeat certain bodies, certain lifestyles, certain relationship narratives, certain ideologies, certain fantasies, certain insecurities, certain forms of attractiveness, and certain explanations of love. If we are not careful, the algorithm becomes a hidden matchmaker of the imagination. It tells us what should be desirable. It tells us what love should look like. It tells us what masculinity and femininity should perform. It tells us which bodies have value. It tells us which relationship dynamics are normal. It tells us what to fear. It tells us what to resent. It tells us what story to place around pain. Embodied discernment is the counterforce. Embodied discernment asks us to return to the body, but not blindly. It asks, what do I actually feel in the presence of this person? Does my body soften or brace? Is this attraction opening me or activating me? Is this content nourishing my capacity to love or distorting it? Is this digital field making me more present or more comparative? Is this desire mine, or has it been trained into me through repetition? Embodied discernment is not just instinct. Instinct can be shaped by wounds. It is not just intuition. Intuition can be confused with anxiety. It is body awareness combined with reflection, evidence, humility, and time. The future of love needs this because algorithmic desire will become stronger. The screen will keep feeding, shaping, stimulating, and ranking. The body must become a place of return, not as an unquestioned authority, but as a living instrument that can tell us when we are becoming fragmented, overstimulated, disconnected, or false. The seventh movement is from isolation to relational literacy. Many people want love, but they have not been taught how to practice a relationship. They have been taught romance through films, desire through culture, gender through scripts, status through comparison, sex through pornography, conflict through family patterns, and heartbreak through social media advice. But they have not necessarily been taught how to repair, how to name a boundary, how to regulate before speaking, how to distinguish a trigger from a present threat, how to ask for reassurance without accusation, how to hold grief, how to leave with dignity, how to apologize without defense, how to receive feedback without collapse, how to recognize the body's state before turning it into a story. This is why relational literacy matters. People need language for what happens in the field between two nervous systems. They need language attachment, rupture, repair, projection, chemistry, jealousy, grief, digital distortion, consent, devotion, freedom, boundaries, and the difference between being activated and being loved. Relational literacy does not make love mechanical. It makes love more survivable. Without language, people often only have blame. You are too needy. You are too cold. You are controlling. You do not care. You are insecure. You are toxic. Sometimes those labels point to something real, but often they stop inquiry too early. Better language allows better questions. What is happening in your body? What is happening in mine? What pattern are we repeating? What boundary is needed? What repair is possible? What truth is being avoided? What is this conflict really about? The future of human connection depends on whether we can become literate in the forces that shape love before they unconsciously govern it. This is not only a private matter, it is cultural. A society with low relational literacy becomes vulnerable to polarization, loneliness, gender war, manipulation, parasocial substitution, digital addiction, and emotional immaturity disguised as empowerment. A society with deeper relational literacy can produce people more capable of truth, repair, commitment, dignity, and freedom. The eighth movement is from certainty to repair. Many people want love to provide certainty. Certainty that they will not be abandoned. Certainty that they are enough. Certainty that the other person will never change. Certainty that the bond will last. Certainty that pain will not come. But love cannot offer absolute certainty. It can offer commitment, honesty, care, consistency, and repair, but not a guarantee against all future vulnerability. Repair may be more important than certainty, because repair is what allows love to survive imperfection. Repair says, something ruptured, but we can tell the truth. Something hurt, but we can listen. Something went wrong, but we can take responsibility. Something activated us, but we do not have to destroy the bond to protect ourselves. The future of love will not belong to people who never rupture. It will belong to people who learn how to repair without humiliation, avoidance, denial, or power games. The ninth movement is from idealization to truth. A lot of early love depends on idealization. We see the possibility before we see the whole person. This is natural, but mature love requires truth. The person must become human. The fantasy must meet behavior. The projection must meet evidence. The body must learn not only the high moments, but the pattern. Truth does not make love smaller. It makes love more real. It allows us to stop loving only the image and begin meeting the person. It allows us to stop performing and begin showing. It allows us to stop demanding perfection and begin asking for responsibility. The future of human connection needs love that can survive truth. Not truth used as cruelty, not bluntness without care, but truth as reality. The truth of need, the truth of limits, the truth of desire, the truth of fear, the truth of incompatibility, the truth of love, the truth of endings. Because a relationship that cannot hold truth cannot become conscious. The final movement is from seeking love to becoming capable of love. This may be the deepest future question. We often ask, how do I find love? But perhaps the deeper question is, what kind of love am I becoming capable of meeting, building, and sustaining? Finding love and being capable of love are not the same thing. We can find attraction before we are capable of intimacy. We can find chemistry before we are capable of repair. We can find someone who desires us before we are capable of receiving love without suspicion. We can find someone safe before our body knows how to trust safety. We can find someone devoted before we know how to remain free within devotion. So the future of love is not only about who appears, it is about who we are becoming when they appear. Are we becoming more present or more performative, more embodied or more algorithmically shaped, more honest or more defended, more capable of repair or more addicted to being right, more able to love freely or more tempted to possess, more able to grieve or more likely to turn pain into ideology, more able to see another human being or more likely to consume them as validation, fantasy, or role? This is where the final episode begins to gather its force. The future of human connection will require more than romance. It will require consciousness. It will require nervous system literacy, emotional honesty, digital discipline, embodied discernment, spiritual maturity, and the courage to remain human in a culture that often turns people into signals. Love must become more conscious because the forces shaping love are becoming more powerful. The algorithms are more persuasive. The comparison fields are more constant. The substitutions are more convincing. The loneliness is more hidden. The performances are more polished. The ideologies are more seductive. The access is more infinite. The nervous systems are more overloaded. So love must become deeper, not shallower. Slower, not merely faster. More embodied, not less. More truthful, not more performative. More free, not more possessive. More discerning, not more cynical. More willing to repair, not more addicted to replacement. The future of human connection depends on whether we can remember that love is not merely something to acquire. It is something to practice, something to become capable of, something to participate in, something to protect from the forces that flatten it into consumption, validation, possession, fantasy, or content. And perhaps that is what love must become now, not less passionate, not less mysterious, not less romantic, but more awake. Awake to the body, awake to the wound, awake to the pattern, awake to the digital field, awake to the other person's humanity, awake to freedom, awake to grief, awake to the responsibility of being someone who does not merely seek connection, but helps make connection more honest, embodied, and alive. Personal reflection. What this series has been asking when I look back across this series, I do not think the resonance between us has only been about love in the romantic sense. It has been about the human need to be met, and all the forces that shape that need before we even know how to name it. It has been about attraction, but also perception, desire, but also history, chemistry, but also the nervous system, spiritual connection, but also projection, jealousy, but also fear, breakups, but also identity, digital dating, but also the way technology reshapes what the body expects from intimacy. Underneath all of it, I think the series has been asking one question in many forms. Can we become conscious inside love before love becomes another place where our wounds perform unconsciously? Because love is one of the places where we are most likely to lose awareness. Not because love is wrong, but because love touches the deepest material. It touches the body before the mind has caught up. It touches the child's self that wants to be chosen. It touches the adolescent self that wants to be desired. It touches the wounded self that wants repair. It touches the defended self that does not want to be hurt again. It touches the spiritual self that wants meaning. It touches the animal body that wants closeness, sex, safety, and bonding. It touches the ego that wants to be special, irreplaceable, and seen. So when we enter love, we do not enter as clean, detached observers. We enter carrying everything. We enter with family history, with cultural scripts, with gender narratives, with emotional memories, with nervous system patterns, with fantasies of rescue, with fears of abandonment, with old betrayals, with digital conditioning, with unspoken expectations, with hopes we may not admit, with wounds that still want a different ending. If we do not become conscious of that material, it does not disappear. It acts itself out. It becomes the person we chase, the person we avoid, the person we project onto, the person we call destiny because they awaken familiar pain, the person we try to control because they activate fear, the person we cannot release because the body is still bonded to the rhythm. The person we turn into is proof of our worth, our future, our healing, or our failure. That is why this series has had to move across so many layers. Love cannot be understood from one angle alone. Biology alone is not enough. Psychology alone is not enough. Spirituality alone is not enough. Culture alone is not enough. Digital analysis alone is not enough. The body alone is not enough, and the mind alone is not enough. Love is layered. It is biological and symbolic, emotional and cultural, nervous system-based and spiritual, personal and collective, ancient and technological. It contains instinct, memory, fantasy, touch, language, status, desire, grief, attachment, repair, projection, and meaning. And perhaps part of the confusion around love comes from trying to reduce it to one of these layers while ignoring the others. If we reduce love to biology, we lose the soul of it. If we reduce love to spirituality, we may ignore behavior. If we reduce love to attachment theory, we may miss mystery. If we reduce love to chemistry, we may confuse activation with truth. If we reduce love to culture, we may miss the private body. If we reduce love to personal choice, we may ignore the systems shaping desire before choice is even made. So this series has tried to hold the whole field. Through the resonance matrix, I explored the invisible architecture of influence, how language, tone, rhythm, social fields, and emotional patterns shape our behavior before we fully recognize them. In this relationship series, that same inquiry appears inside love. How does a voice regulate or destabilize? How does silence become meaning? How does a message become a signal? How does a person become a mirror? How does a body become attached to a rhythm? How does a wound become a worldview? How does a relationship become a field that shapes perception? Through nervous system language, I keep returning to the idea that language is not just information, it is a state. It lands in the body. It can open, close, soothe, threaten, invite, shame, control, or repair. In love, this is everywhere. A phrase can become safe or dangerous depending on tone. An apology can be regulatory or feel empty, depending on whether it carries accountability. A silence can be peaceful or punitive. A boundary can be loving or cold. A reassurance can soothe or become a ritual of dependency. The nervous system is always listening beneath the words. Through the consciousness code, the pattern is also visible. Stimulus, nervous system interpretation, subconscious activation, emotional state, conscious interpretation, behavior, and narrative reinforcement. This loop lives inside relationships constantly. A partner delays replying. The body interprets. A wound activates. An emotional state rises. The mind builds a story. Behavior follows. Then the story becomes reinforced. That loop can build conflict, jealousy, pursuit, withdrawal, or resentment before anyone has slowed down enough to ask what actually happened. Through My Inner Child Was Broken, the relational thread was deeply personal. Adult love often awakens younger places in us. The part that wanted to be chosen. The part that feared being left. The part that adapted to survive. The part that learned to perform, please, withdraw, control, rescue, or numb. The inner child does not disappear because we enter adult relationships. Sometimes adult love is exactly where the younger wound becomes most visible. This is why I think love can be one of the most honest mirrors we ever encounter. It shows us where we are generous, but also where we are afraid. Where we can open, but also where we manipulate. Where we can care, but also where we disappear. Where we want truth, but also where we prefer fantasy. Where we want freedom, but also where we want control. Where we want intimacy, but also where we fear being fully seen. I do not think the answer is to become detached, cynical, emotionally guarded, or above love. That is one of the traps. When people get hurt, they often decide that the lesson is to need less, feel less, trust less, risk less, or love less. But I do not think that is alchemy. That may be protection. It may be understandable. But it is not the full transformation. The deeper work is not to avoid being changed by another person. It is to become conscious of how we are being changed. Because love will change us, even when it ends, even when it fails, even when it hurts, even when it reveals something we did not want to see. The question is whether that change makes us more defended or more awake, more bitter or more discerning, more closed or more truthful, more controlling or more responsible, more detached or more embodied, more addicted to fantasy or more capable of reality. That, for me, is the personal heart of this final episode. The series has not been asking us to perfect love. It has been asking us to become more awake inside it. To notice the first signal, to question what desire is choosing, to listen to the nervous system, to recognize the mirror, to understand the roles, to watch how pain becomes ideology, to respect chemistry without worshipping it, to honor mystery without losing discernment, to remember that the body keeps the bond, to see how technology distorts attraction, to question soulmate language when familiar pain is speaking, to translate jealousy before it becomes possession, to understand heartbreak as the collapse and rebuilding of a relational self. Now, at the end, it asks whether all of that can become love with more consciousness inside it. Not perfect love, not painless love, not love stripped of passion, mystery, or longing, but love that has become more honest. A love where the body is listened to, but not blindly obeyed. A love where the wound is acknowledged, but not allowed to rule. A love where the other person is allowed to be human, not forced to become savior, parent, proof, possession, or destiny. A love where freedom and devotion are not enemies. A love where repair matters more than performance. A love where grief can be metabolized instead of becoming identity. And perhaps that is what this series has always been asking. Can love become a place where consciousness deepens, rather than a place where unconsciousness repeats? Can we meet another person without abandoning ourselves? Can we be changed without being consumed? Can we desire without projecting? Can we commit without possessing? Can we grieve without disappearing? Can we recognize the sacred without using it to avoid reality? Can we make connections more honest, embodied, and alive? If there is a future for connection, I think it begins there. Not with perfect people finding perfect people, but with imperfect people becoming more conscious of the field they create, more willing to translate the body, more willing to repair language, more willing to tell the truth, more willing to see the pattern, more willing to love without turning love into a hiding place. Because in the end, the deepest relationship work may not be finding someone who never activates us. It may be becoming conscious enough to understand what activation is trying to reveal, and mature enough not to turn that revelation into harm. That is what this series has been asking. That is what love, at its most alchemical, may still be asking from us. For this final episode, the practice is to choose one relationship, past or present, that shaped you deeply. It does not have to be the most painful relationship, or the most romantic, or the one that lasted the longest. Choose the one that still feels significant because it changed how you understood love, yourself, your body, your wounds, your patterns, or your capacity to connect. Bring that relationship to mind gently, without forcing it into one category. Do not rush to call it good, bad, toxic, failed, destined, or pointless. Let it be complex for a moment. Let it be human. Then move through the map of this series. What was the first signal before words? What did your body notice before your mind had a clear explanation? What did desire seem to choose in that person? Was it safety, excitement, familiarity, mystery, status, softness, danger, depth, rescue, or something harder to name? Then ask what the relationship did to your nervous system. Did it regulate you, activate you, or both? Did you feel more grounded and present, or more anxious, performative, avoidant, obsessive, or dependent? What state did you repeatedly enter around them? Ask what they mirrored. Did they reveal longing, confidence, tenderness, sexuality, creativity, abandonment, jealousy, shame, fear, or an old wound? Did you see the person clearly, or did they become a projection, a future, a savior, a sacred mirror, a threat, or proof of your worth? Ask what role you performed. Were you the rescuer, the caretaker, the chaser, the avoider, the strong one, the silent one, the wounded one, the one trying to be chosen, the one trying to stay safe, or the one pretending not to care? Then look at chemistry. Was the intensity grounded and mutual, or did it grow through uncertainty, distance, longing, conflict, or relief? Did chemistry help you open, or did it make discernment harder? Ask whether there was resonance, or projection, or both. Did the connection carry meaning? Did you turn that meaning into destiny? Did spiritual language clarify the bond, or did it protect you from seeing behavior clearly? Look at the body. What does your body still remember? Touch, absence, rhythm, voice, place, smell, routine, silence, withdrawal, return. Then ask what technology did to the bond. Did messages, social media, digital access, old photos, story views, online status, or archive traces deepen connection, distort it, or keep it alive after it had ended? Finally, ask what is now asking to be integrated. What part of you was shaped by that relationship? What part still needs grief? What part needs to be reclaimed? What lesson is not about blaming them or blaming yourself, but about seeing the pattern clearly enough to stop repeating it unconsciously? This practice is not about judging the relationship. It is about translating it. Every significant relationship leaves material for consciousness if we are willing to listen. Final integration. The alchemy of love. So this is where the whole series finally gathers. Love becomes alchemical when it transforms unconscious material into awareness. Not when it becomes perfect. Not when it becomes painless. Not when it removes uncertainty, desire, longing, jealousy, grief, rupture, or fear. Love becomes alchemical when those experiences are no longer left in the dark to govern the relationship unconsciously. It becomes alchemical when attraction teaches us what the body recognizes. When projection reveals what we have placed onto another person. When chemistry becomes information rather than a command. When jealousy becomes a signal to translate rather than a force that turns love into territory. When heartbreak becomes a place of reconstruction rather than only destruction. When digital distortion teaches us to choose presence over endless access. When spiritual longing is held with discernment rather than used to avoid reality. This has been the deeper movement of the resonance between us. It has not been a rejection of romance, chemistry, mystery, devotion, attraction, or soul. It has been an attempt to bring consciousness into the places where love can so easily become unconscious. Because love is powerful precisely because it touches the deepest material in us. It touches the body before the mind has finished explaining. It touches memory. It touches old wounds. It touches the desire to be chosen. It touches the fear of being left. It touches the ache to be witnessed. It touches the fantasy of being completed. It touches the places where we perform, collapse, chase, withdraw, control, rescue, idealize, or disappear. If that material remains unconscious, love can become repetition. We may keep choosing familiar pain and calling it chemistry. We may keep projecting destiny onto people who cannot meet us. We may keep mistaking attention for intimacy. We may keep using another person's desire as proof of worth. We may keep calling jealousy devotion when it is really fear. We may keep making someone responsible for wounds they did not create. We may keep treating heartbreak as the end of the self rather than the collapse of a relational structure that now has to be rebuilt. But when that material becomes conscious, love changes function. It stops being only the place where we seek comfort, validation, rescue, status, belonging, or completion, and becomes a place where the self can be seen more truthfully. Attraction becomes alchemical when it teaches us what the body recognizes. The first signal before words is not meaningless. The body notices. It orients. It opens, braces, leans, tightens, softens, or becomes alert. But the question is not simply, am I attracted? The deeper question is, what is my body recognizing here? Is it safety, familiarity, danger, mystery, status, tenderness, distance, a pattern I have known before, a form of presence I genuinely trust? Attraction becomes conscious when it is listened to without being blindly obeyed. Projection becomes alchemical when we reclaim what we placed onto another person. The other person may awaken longing, desire, creativity, tenderness, grief, sexuality, hope, or a future image. They may become mirror, archetype, wound, savior, threat, witness, or sacred symbol. But relational alchemy asks us to bring that meaning back into awareness. What did they reveal? What did I imagine? What part of me did I only feel near them? What did I believe they alone could give me? When projection is reclaimed, the person becomes human again, and the self takes back the life force it had placed outside itself. Chemistry becomes alchemical when we understand intensity without worshipping it. Chemistry is real. The body can be moved by another person with enormous force. Desire can awaken. Sexual charge can be powerful. Uncertainty can heighten longing. Touch can imprint. Hormonal bonding can create attachment. But chemistry is not always the truth. Sometimes it is grounded aliveness. Sometimes it is nervous system activation. Sometimes it is novelty. Sometimes it is intermittent reinforcement. Sometimes it is the old wound recognizing a familiar rhythm. Conscious love does not kill chemistry. It asks what the chemistry is made of. Jealousy becomes alchemical when we translate threat without turning love into territory. Jealousy may reveal something real, betrayal, ambiguity, disrespect, lack of clarity, or a boundary that needs to be spoken. But it may also reveal fear of replacement, shame, comparison, abandonment, old betrayal, or the desire to control uncertainty. Jealousy becomes destructive when fear tries to own another person. It becomes conscious when we ask, what does this jealousy believe is under threat? Love, status, loyalty, dignity, safety, a real boundary, an old wound? Translation turns jealousy from possession into information. Heartbreak becomes alchemical when grief reconstructs the self rather than destroying it. A breakup hurts because the person is gone, but also because a world collapses. The rhythm ends. The future image dies. The body loses access to a familiar source of regulation. The ego loses a role. The relational self dissolves. But grief can slowly become reconstruction when we ask what part of the self was built around the bond, what was outsourced to the relationship, what must be grieved, what must be reclaimed, and what kind of self is trying to be born after the loss. Healing does not always mean forgetting. Sometimes it means remembering without collapsing. Digital distortion becomes alchemical when we choose presence over endless access. Technology can connect people. It can create beginnings. It can help isolated people find one another. But it can also train the nervous system into validation loops, comparison, surveillance, parasocial intimacy, artificial companionship, digital ghosts, and the illusion that access is the same as intimacy. The alchemy is not rejecting technology entirely. It is learning to use the digital field as a doorway, not a substitute for embodied relational courage. A profile is not a person, a match is not a bond, a message is not the same as presence. Endless access is not the same as being truly met. Spiritual longing becomes alchemical when mystery is held with discernment. Some connections do feel meaningful. Some encounters arrive with strange timing. Some bonds awaken the soul, the body, and the wound all at once. But meaning is not always mutuality. Mystery is not always destiny. Pain is not always proof of depth. A sacred mirror is not always a life partner. Conscious love honors mystery without using it to bypass behavior. If a connection is sacred, it should make us more truthful, not less. More grounded, not more obsessive. More present, not more dependent on signs. More dignified, not more self-abandoning. These are the final reframes. The old frame says, love should complete me. The deeper frame says, love can meet me, reveal me, and transform me, but it should not erase me. The old frame says, chemistry means truth. The deeper frame says, chemistry is information. Conscious love asks, what kind? The old frame says, a powerful connection must be destiny. The deeper frame says, a powerful connection may be a mirror, wound, lesson, love, or all of these. The old frame says, if I lose them, I lose myself. The deeper frame says, if I lose them, I may have to reclaim the parts of myself I placed inside the bond. The old frame says, love is found. The deeper frame says, love is found, built, repaired, chosen, and made conscious. This final reframe may be the most important. Love is not only found. It is not only a matter of meeting the right person, recognizing the right signal, feeling the right chemistry, receiving the right match, or discovering the one who finally completes the story. Love is also built. It is built through repeated behavior, through nervous system safety, through repair after rupture, through truth after fantasy, through the courage to let the other person be human, through the discipline to notice our own patterns, and through the humility to keep returning to consciousness when old wounds try to take over the field. Love is repaired. It is not proven by never rupturing. It is proven by what happens after rupture. Can truth enter the room? Can accountability survive shame? Can an apology change behavior? Can fear be spoken without becoming accusation? Can boundaries be named without becoming punishment? Can the bond metabolize difficulty, or does every wound become another layer of defense? Love is chosen. Not forced, not extracted, not surveilled into loyalty, not possessed into obedience. Chosen. Chosen freely enough that devotion remains alive. Chosen enough that commitment honestly does not become captivity. Chosen repeatedly enough that the nervous system learns trust not from promises alone, but from patterns. Love is made conscious, not by analyzing it until it loses its soul, but by inviting the body, heart, mind, language, nervous system, memory, and spirit into awareness. Conscious love does not remove passion. It gives passion a safer home. It does not remove mystery. It gives mystery discernment. It does not remove longing. It teaches longing not to call every ache destiny. It does not remove vulnerability. It teaches vulnerability not to become controlled. This is where the series leaves us, not with a final answer, but with a deeper responsibility. To meet love not as a fantasy to disappear into, but as a field of consciousness we participate in. To understand that every significant connection asks something from us, not only to feel, but to listen. Not only to want, but to discern. Not only to be chosen, but to remain present with the self that is doing the choosing. And this is where the resonance between us returns to the wider work of this place called Earth. Because love is one of the most intimate places where perception, language, embodiment, influence, identity, and consciousness meet. It is where the nervous system becomes relational, where language becomes state, where wounds become patterns, where culture enters the body, where digital systems reshape desire, where the self is mirrored, broken open, defended, awakened, and sometimes remade. The future of human connection depends on whether we can become literate in all of this, whether we can recognize the forces shaping love before they govern us unconsciously, whether we can become more present than performative, more embodied than algorithmically trained, more honest than defended, more devoted than possessive, more discerning than cynical, and more willing to repair than replace. That is the alchemy of love, not the fantasy that love saves us, the possibility that love, when made conscious, helps us become fully human. So to close this episode, and to close this series, I leave you with this. Perhaps the real question is not, how do I find love? Perhaps the deeper question is, what kind of love am I becoming capable of meeting? Because finding love and becoming capable of love are not the same thing. We can find attraction before we are capable of intimacy. We can find chemistry before we are capable of discernment. We can find someone who desires us before we know how to receive desire without turning it into proof of worth. We can find someone safe before our nervous system knows how to trust safety. We can find someone devoted before we know how to remain free inside devotion. So what is love when we stop accessing it unconsciously? What is love when it is not possession, not projection, not performance, not chemistry alone, not digital validation, not wound repetition, not spiritual bypassing, not the desperate attempt to make another person complete what still waits inside us? What is love when two people can remain free and still choose each other? What is love when the body, heart, mind, language, nervous system, and soul are all invited into awareness? Can I recognize attraction without being ruled by it? Can I honor chemistry without confusing it with truth? Can I feel longing without turning it into destiny? Can I allow mystery without abandoning discernment? Can I feel jealousy without turning love into surveillance? Can I ask for devotion without demanding possession? Can I be close without disappearing? Can I be free without becoming unavailable? Can I grieve without losing myself completely? Can I allow another person to change me without handing them the authorship of my life? Can I meet love as a field of consciousness, not just a feeling to chase? And can I become the kind of presence that does not merely seek connection, but helps make connection more honest, embodied, and alive? Because perhaps love is not only something we fall into, perhaps love is also something we rise into, not in a sentimental way, not by becoming perfect, healed, untouched, or immune to fear, but by becoming more conscious of what moves through us when another person begins to matter, by learning to pause before turning activation into harm, by learning to translate the body before obeying the story, by learning to repair when pride wants to defend, by learning to let another person be human without collapsing the mystery of the bond, by learning to let ourselves be changed without being erased. This series began with a signal before words, that first subtle movement where the body notices before language names, and it ends here with love after language, after projection, after chemistry, after rupture, after grief, after the self has been asked again and again to see more clearly. Maybe the signal before words is where love begins. The alchemy of love is what becomes possible when consciousness finally enters the signal, when we can feel the pull and still ask what it means, when we can desire and remain honest, when we can bond and remain free, when we can be wounded and still choose not to turn the wound into a weapon, when we can be changed by love and still return to the self with more truth than before. That is the deeper invitation of relational consciousness, not to master love, not to control it, not to reduce it to theory, biology, psychology, or spiritual language, but to participate in it with more awareness, more humility, more responsibility, and more care. Love will still be mysterious. It will still surprise us. It will still break through our theories. It will still awaken the body before the mind is ready. It will still create longing, tenderness, fear, joy, grief, and transformation. Consciousness does not remove that. It simply asks us to meet it differently, to stop making love a hiding place for unconscious wounds, to stop making another person the owner of our worth, to stop treating chemistry as certainty, to stop treating jealousy as devotion, to stop treating pain as proof of destiny, to stop treating heartbreak as the end of the self, to begin by asking how love might become a practice of truth, a practice of presence, a practice of repair, a practice of freedom, a practice of devotion, a practice of becoming more human in the presence of another human being. If there is one line to carry from this series, perhaps it is this. Love is not made conscious by removing the mystery. Love is made conscious by bringing truth into the mystery. If there is one final invitation, it is to meet connection with both tenderness and clarity, to stay close enough to feel, but clear enough to see, to remain open enough to love, but grounded enough not to disappear, to honor the sacredness of human connection without surrendering the self to fantasy, fear, possession, or pain. Thank you for joining me throughout this series. You've been listening to The Resonance Between Us, Episode 15, The Alchemy of Love, Relational Consciousness, and the Future of Human Connection. I'm James Miller. Until we meet again, may you stay close enough to feel, clear enough to see, and conscious enough to love without losing yourself.